Welcome back, cozy knights. Lower your swords. Pull that blanket a little tighter. Tonight we're going somewhere cold and ancient and impossibly deep. We're going to Skyrim. Not to fight dragons or pick locks or accidentally launch a wheel of cheese off the throat of the world. We're going to the quiet places inside this world. The lore that lives in the margins of old books, in the bones embedded in cave walls, in the silence between a graybeard's words. There are 130 facts ahead of you. Some of them will change the way you see the whole game. Some of them will make you feel something strange and small, the way good lore always does. So, get comfortable. This is going to take a while. Part 1. The world before the world. Let's begin before Skyrim, before Tamriel, before any of it, because the lore that makes this world feel so incredibly heavy and ancient starts before the first stone was placed. Fact 1. The universe began as two forces in opposition. At the very beginning, in the Elder Scrolls cosmology, there were only two things. Anu, which represented stasis, light, and the unchanging, and Padome, which represented change, chaos, and motion. These weren't gods with personalities yet. They were more like raw principles, two opposing frequencies that had no choice but to interact with each other. From the tension between them, everything else emerged. The Et Ada, which translates roughly to the original spirits, were born from that interaction. These beings would eventually become the Aedra, which are the gods we know from the Nine Divines, and the Daedra, the princes who rule over oblivion. So, every divine thing in Skyrim's universe traces its lineage back to a single moment of friction between stillness and motion. Everything that exists came from the collision of something that wanted to stop and something that refused to. Fact 2. The stars are not stars, they're holes. When you stand in the night sky in Skyrim and look up, you're not seeing distant suns, you're seeing holes. According to Nordic cosmology and the lore of Tamriel, each star is a puncture in the fabric of Mundus, the mortal plane. The large one in the daytime sky, what we'd call the sun, is the largest hole, the place where the god Magnus fled when creation became too costly. The smaller points of light in the night sky are where the lesser divine beings, the Magna Gae, also tore their way out. They had been helping Lorcan build the mortal world, and when they realized the work was consuming their divine essence, draining them toward mortality, they panicked. Magnus ripped the first and largest hole. The others followed, punching smaller tears as they fled. The light you see from the stars is literally divine energy bleeding through from Aetherius, the realm beyond. So, every peaceful night spent looking at Skyrim's sky is actually looking at the scars left behind by gods abandoning creation. The magic in the world, the magicka that mages and the Dragonborn use, seeps in through those very holes. Every spell cast in Tamriel is powered by that leaking divine light. Fact 3. The two moons are a dead god's body. If the stars are holes, the moons are something even stranger. The two moons of Nirn, Masr, and Secunda are widely believed in Elder Scrolls lore to be the sundered remains of Lorcan, the god who convinced the others to build the mortal world in the first place. Lorcan had a vision. He wanted to create a place where the Et Ada could experience existence in a new way, a physical world of change and experience. He persuaded them, though some say he tricked them, into sacrificing pieces of their divine nature to make it possible. When the Aedra realized what had happened, that their immortal power had been diminished in the process, many of them were furious. Auriel, the elven god of time, led the charge against Lorcan. His knight, Trinimac, tore Lorcan's heart from his chest. Auriel then flung the heart using a sacred bow, and it struck the earth with such force that it created the Red Mountain in Morrowind, the volcano that would later play a critical role in the disappearance of the Dwemer. The rest of Lorcan's body was torn into two halves and became the moons. So, the next time you see both moons hanging low over Skyrim's horizon during a quiet evening, you're looking at the split corpse of the god who chose to create everything you're walking through. Masr is larger, reddish, described as being in a permanent state of decay. Secunda is smaller and silvery, and somewhere beneath the ground in Morrowind, his heart still beats. Fact 4. The Khajiit are shaped by the lunar cycle. The moons aren't just important as a creation myth. They actively define the Khajiit as a species. Every Khajiit's physical form is determined by which phases of Masr and Secunda were present at the time of their birth. There are over 20 distinct Khajiit breeds, from the enormous cat-like Senche that serve as mounts and war companions, to the tiny Alfik who look almost like house cats, to the Cathay and Omes and all the variations between. The same mother could give birth to entirely different-looking children, depending purely on what the moons were doing that night. This makes the moons deeply sacred in Khajiit religion, and it also explains a historically dark piece of lore. At the very beginning of the Fourth Era, between the years 98 and 100, both moons vanished entirely. This event, called the Void Nights, caused devastating consequences for the Khajiit. Children born during those 2 years were stillborn because without the lunar lattice to define their form, they simply couldn't manifest. The Thalmor, specifically the Aldmeri Dominion's elven power structure, later claimed credit for ending the Void Nights and restoring the moons. That single act of apparent salvation was enough to persuade the Khajiit to join the Dominion, and that alliance shapes the political structure of Tamriel all the way into Skyrim's timeline. 2 years of darkness in the sky, and the Thalmor gained the loyalty of an entire continent's worth of people. Fact 5. The Aedra became the planets. The gods who stayed behind to help Lorkhan build Mundus didn't disappear, they transformed. Because they had sacrificed so much of their divine essence to create the mortal plane, they became part of it. Each of the 8 divines is also, in Elder Scrolls cosmology, a planet. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, is one of the outer celestial bodies. Mara, Kinnereth, Zenithar, they're all up there in the sky, though mortals perceive them as mere points of light. The gods didn't choose to be worshipped from distant thrones. They bled themselves into creation so thoroughly that they became the architecture of the universe itself. Their sacrifice is baked into every sunrise, every tide, every bit of gravity that holds things down. This is why the Daedric princes, who never participated in creating Mundus and therefore kept their full divine power, are actually stronger in terms of raw cosmic force than the Aedra. The Aedra gave something, the Daedra didn't. And yet Aedric blessings feel warmer to mortals because those gods are woven into the fabric of the world, not distant and alien, but literally the ground beneath your feet and the sky above your head. Fact 6. Mundus is a prison you were born inside. Here's a deeply unsettling piece of Elder Scrolls cosmology. The mortal world, Mundus, functions in certain scholarly interpretations as a kind of cage. When the Irada bound themselves to creation, they became subject to linear time, to cause and effect, to mortality. The Daedric princes, who exist in oblivion outside Mundus, are not bound by this. They can observe mortal time the way you might look at a photograph, seeing all of it at once. Mortals experience time as a sequence. Gods outside Mundus experience it as a landscape. Some deeper lore texts suggest that the Aedra, now reduced to planetary bodies, are trapped in a way. They gave too much of themselves, and now they can only interact with creation through the thinnest of interventions, shrines, blessings, chosen heroes. The Daedra, for all their cruelty and manipulation, are more free than any god in the sky simply because they never sacrificed anything to make the world. There's a quiet tragedy in that. The kindest gods are the most constrained. The most dangerous ones are the ones who never gave up a single drop. Fact 7. There have been multiple worlds before this one. In Elder Scrolls cosmology, the current universe is not the first. Each cycle of existence is called a kalpa. The world is created. Alduin, the World Eater, eventually devours it, and then a new kalpa begins. The events of Skyrim take place in what is presumably the most recent kalpa, though the exact number of previous cycles is unknown. This means that everything the Dragonborn experiences, every mountain and ruin and person, exists against a backdrop of uncountable previous existences, each one consumed and reset. The Nords know this about Alduin. When they speak of him as the World Eater, they're not being metaphorical. His function in the cosmic cycle is to end creation so it can begin again. This is why his return in Skyrim represents more than just a military threat. It means the current world is approaching the end of its cycle. It also means that defeating Alduin, as the Dragonborn eventually does, isn't simply heroism. It's an act of cosmic defiance. You're not just stopping a dragon. You're arguing against the entire framework of cyclical reality. Fact 8. The Eye of Magnus may predate the current world. Deep beneath the ruins of Sarthal lies an artifact so old and so incomprehensible that even the ancient snow elves who attacked the settlement to prevent humans from possessing it didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. The Eye of Magnus appears in the College of Winterhold questline as an object of terrifying power. Some scholars in the lore believe it predates conventional Elder Scrolls cosmology entirely, that it may be a remnant from a previous Kalpa that survived the world-devouring transition. It doesn't fit into any known category of magical creation because it likely predates the current framework of magic. It's raw, undifferentiated creative power. When it activates, it threatens to tear reality apart. The Sigic Order, who are the oldest magical organization in Tamriel and who live on an island that can remove itself from normal space-time, considered the Eye dangerous enough that they seized it and removed it from mortal access entirely. When beings who can walk through stopped time are afraid of something, that something is worth being afraid of. If you're tucked in listening to this right now, pause for a moment and think about that. Every playthrough you've ever done, every time you wandered through Sarthal and found that strange glowing orb, you were brushing up against an object that might be older than time itself. Something that watched entire universes get created and consumed and didn't blink. Now, before we go further, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from tonight and what time it is. And if you haven't already, a subscription really does help more than you'd think. It lets this channel keep doing exactly this, going deep into the worlds you love in the quiet hours. Right, let's keep going. Part 2. The Dwemer, the most brilliant failure in history. If there is one faction in all of Elder Scrolls lore that makes you feel genuinely sad about a fictional civilization, it's the Dwemer, also called dwarves, though they had nothing in common with the small, bearded miners of other fantasy settings. The Dwemer were a race of deeply intelligent, deeply arrogant elves who built cities underground, powered machines with unknown energy sources, and ultimately disappeared in an instant, leaving behind only their automatons and their mysteries. Fact 9. The Dwemer were not dwarves in any conventional sense. The name Dwemer translates roughly to deep folk or people of the deep in their own language. They got the name dwarves from the Nords because the first Nord settlers who encountered them found them smaller than expected, and the name stuck despite being completely inaccurate. In reality, the Dwemer were a branch of Mer, the elven races of Tamriel, and they were as tall and long-lived as any other elves. What made them distinct was their philosophy. Where other elven cultures turned to the Daedra for power or to the Aedra for wisdom, the Dwemer rejected both. They were radical empiricists. They believed the universe was fundamentally mechanical, that divinity was a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be revered. They didn't worship gods. They tried to build one. Fact 10. The Dwemer built machines using the laws of reality itself. The engineering approach the Dwemer used is called tonal architecture, and it's unlike anything else in Tamriel's history. The Dwemer believed that existence was, at its most fundamental level, composed of sound and resonance, not metaphorically, literally. The underlying code of the universe was musical. By discovering the right frequencies and manipulating them with precision, they could reshape matter, generate self-sustaining energy, and create physical structures that wouldn't degrade over time. This is why Dwemer ruins still function perfectly 3,000 years after their civilization collapsed. The Centurions still patrol, the traps still fire, the steam vents still hiss. These aren't machines in the way we'd understand a machine. They're nodes of tonal manipulation that maintain themselves by interacting with the fundamental frequencies of reality around them. They don't need fuel because they're not consuming energy. They're resonating with it. There's a quiet echo in this when you compare it to the Thu'um, which we'll get to later. The Dragonborn uses voice to reshape reality. The Dwemer used mathematics to do the same thing. Two completely different approaches to the same underlying truth. This universe is a song, and if you know the notes, you can change it. Fact 11. Kagrenak found the heart of a dead god and poked it. Everything that happened to the Dwemer traces back to one moment of either incredible hubris or extraordinary ambition, depending on your perspective. Dwemer miners in Morrowind were excavating beneath the Red Mountain when they found something unbelievable. Lorkhan's heart, the actual organ of the dead god who built the world, still intact after eons, radiating power that defied all classification. Rather than treat it as sacred, or leave it alone, or even study it from a cautious distance, The Dwemer's chief tonal architect, a man named Kagranok, immediately started building tools to exploit it. He created 3 instruments: keening, a dagger; sunder, a hammer; and wraithguard, a gauntlet that protected the user from the other's feedback. His plan was straightforward in its recklessness. He would use the heart as a power source for a mechanical god he had designed, a massive brass construct called Numidium. And through Numidium, he would elevate the entire Dwemer race to divine status through pure engineering, not by becoming more spiritual, by becoming, effectively, a god machine's power supply. Fact 12. The Dwemer vanished in an instant in 1E700. During the Battle of Red Mountain in the First Era's 700th year, the Chimer, a precursor people to the Dark Elves, attacked the Dwemer in Morrowind. In the midst of this battle, with his people potentially facing defeat, Kagranok made his move. He struck the heart of Lorkhan with his tools. What happened next has been debated by in-game scholars for thousands of years. Every single Dwemer on the face of Nirn, regardless of where they were, disappeared simultaneously. Not just those at Red Mountain, not just those in Morrowind. Every Dwemer in every city, every traveler on every road, every child asleep in every bed. All of them were simply gone. Investigators who later entered Dwemer settlements in places like Bamzamshen found piles of ash resting next to weapons and armor, on chairs, in beds. The shape of bodies reduced to dust exactly where they stood, while the machines around them kept running without interruption. The automatons didn't stop. The steam didn't cease. The city's mechanical heart kept beating. Only the people were gone. Fact 13. One Dwemer survived, and he doesn't know what happened either. In the Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, players can meet the last known living Dwemer. His name is Yagrom Bagarn, and he survived the disappearance only because he was traveling in what he calls an outer realm at the time, some extra-dimensional space that insulated him from whatever happened to his people. When he returned, he found everyone gone, and he has spent the centuries since in isolation, contracting a terrible wasting disease called Corpus. He sits in a Telvanni tower, enormous and misshapen from the disease, and he simply doesn't know what happened to his people. He has theories, as any Dwemer would, but certainty eludes him. He is the living ghost of an entire civilization, the single survivor of a vanishing so complete that not even the person who escaped it can explain it. In Skyrim, a scholar at the College of Winterhold, named Arniel Gain, becomes obsessed with understanding the Dwemer's disappearance. He obtains keening, one of Kagranok's tools, and attempts to recreate the circumstances with a modified soul gem acting as a stand-in for the heart. He performs the ritual. And then Arniel vanishes, just like his subjects of study did. His shade sometimes wanders the halls of the college afterward, apparently unaware that he no longer exists in the conventional sense. He became the very mystery he was trying to solve. Fact 14. The Dwemer may have become the brass god they were building. One of the most compelling theories about the Dwemer's fate is that they didn't die. They became Numidium. The mechanical god they were building needed the heart of Lorkhan as a power source. Some scholars believe Kagranok's act caused every Dwemer soul to be drawn into Numidium simultaneously, fusing the entire race into the skin of the mechanical deity. If this is true, then Numidium, which later appeared in events the Elder Scrolls timeline describes as world-altering, literally walks around powered by the souls of every Dwemer who ever lived. The machines they built continue running because they are, in some sense, still here, not as individuals but as the ambient hum of a civilization that successfully, catastrophically, became what it was trying to create. The question of whether this counts as transcendence or annihilation is one the Elder Scrolls lore never fully answers. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe for the Dwemer, those were always the same thing. Fact 15. Blackreach was first settled by vampires. Long before the Dwemer built their underground highway through it, the massive subterranean cavern of Blackreach had a prior occupant. According to in-game lore, some of the earliest vampire clans in the Merethic era established kingdoms in its depths. The darkness, the isolation, the distance from sunlight made it perfect territory. When the Dwemer later arrived and began their construction projects, the vampires were displaced or absorbed into whatever arrangement the Dwemer made with the underground world. Then when the Snow Elves fled underground after the Night of Tears, some of them passed through spaces like Blackreach. When the Dwemer vanished, the Falmer, which is what the Snow Elves had become, finally had the place to themselves. The modern Blackreach, with its glowing mushrooms and Dwemer ruins and artificial sun, is therefore a place with layers of occupation, stretching back to some of the most ancient inhabitants of Nirn. You are never just walking through an empty dungeon in the Elder Scrolls. You are always walking through someone's history. Fact 16. The glowing mushrooms in Blackreach aren't native to Tamriel. The luminescent fungi that light Blackreach aren't catalogued anywhere in Tamrielic botanical records. They appear to be something unique to this underground ecosystem, either cultivated by the Dwemer using their biological engineering capabilities, or something that arrived in Blackreach through means unknown. The artificial sun at the cavern's center supplements their growth. Some scholars have speculated the mushrooms were brought from somewhere else entirely, perhaps from one of the extra-dimensional spaces the Dwemer were known to access, and that they were modified to survive and flourish in a sealed underground environment. Whether they are alien flora, Dwemer-engineered organisms, or simply a natural species that evolved in total isolation, they created an entirely self-sustaining underground biome that has now been running for thousands of years with no one maintaining it. This is the Dwemer legacy in miniature. Systems so well designed, they outlive their creators by millennia without anyone needing to touch them. Fact 17. The dragon Volthuriol is trapped in Blackreach, and no one knows why. At the center of Blackreach hangs a large orb above the debate hall, clearly a piece of Dwemer design. If you use unrelenting force on it, a dragon named Volthuriol emerges from somewhere in the depths and attacks. This dragon is not resurrected by Alduin. He wasn't slumbering in a burial mound. He's simply there, underground, in a place where no dragon should logically be. Volthuriol's name in the dragon language means something close to Overlord of the Dark Fire. How he got there, why he stayed, whether he arrived before or after the Dwemer vanished, the game never explains. One theory among lore enthusiasts is that the Dwemer, with their tonal architecture, had ways of containing or studying creatures like dragons, and Volthuriol is the result of one of those experiments. He's been down there in the dark for potentially thousands of years, waiting, which is either tragic or terrifying, depending on your disposition. Fact 18. Dwemer automatons are technically still operating under their original orders. The centurions, spiders, and spheres you fight in Dwemer ruins aren't malfunctioning. They're doing exactly what they were programmed to do. Their creators left, and they continued their assignments with perfect fidelity. Some of them were set to defend specific locations, some to patrol specific paths. Some, like the machines in Blackreach, were set to maintain operations. 3,000 years later, with no orders to stop, no command structure to update their instructions, they're still doing it. There's something deeply haunting about this. The Dwemer's final legacy is an army of obedient servants carrying out orders that were last updated before the Roman Empire existed in our world, protecting rooms whose purpose has been forgotten, serving people who are gone. Every time you fight a Dwemer construct, you're fighting the final echo of a dead civilization's last commands. What makes this even more remarkable is the sheer variety of design. The spiders are clearly scouts and maintenance units, small enough to travel through narrow passages and fitted with mechanisms suggesting they were originally meant for repair work as much as defense. The spheres have joints that allow extraordinary mobility, able to collapse into a rolling form for speed and then expand into bipedal warriors for combat, suggesting a design philosophy that prioritized adaptability. The centurions, the largest and most powerful, are essentially walking fortresses, carrying weapons capable of releasing clouds of superheated steam that do not seem to have any explanation in conventional metallurgy or chemical engineering. The Dwemer built these things to last indefinitely, and they have. There are scholars in Skyrim's Fourth Era who have spent entire careers attempting to understand how a single dwarven sphere is articulated, let alone powered. They have not succeeded. And yet a 12-year-old with enough lockpicks and a bit of determination can walk into Chuan Zel and punch one to death. The Dwemer would probably find this offensive. Part 3. Dragons, Alduin, and the war that shaped everything. If the Dwemer represent what happens when intellect overreaches its purpose, the dragons represent what happens when power mistakes itself for divinity. Their history in Skyrim is not simply the history of big flying creatures. It is the entire historical spine of Nordic civilization. Fact 19. Dragons were never born and will never die permanently. This is one of the stranger pieces of dragon lore that the game presents almost casually. Dragons don't reproduce. They aren't born from eggs or parents. They exist the way concepts exist, as fundamental features of reality that simply are. They predated linear time. In the cosmology of Tamriel, they emerged at the same moment as the other divine principles, not created by anything but inherent to the structure of existence. This is why the Dragonborn absorbing dragon souls is such a significant act. You're not just killing a creature. You're consuming the soul of something that shouldn't be killable in a conventional sense. When a dragon dies without a Dragonborn present to absorb its soul, it can, in theory, be resurrected. Only Alduin had this power among dragons, the ability to pull a soul back from Sovngarde and re-knit it to rebuilt flesh. By absorbing those souls yourself, you ensure they can never return. Fact 20. Alduin's name means Destroyer, Devour, Master. In the dragon language, Alduin breaks down as Al, meaning destroyer, Du, meaning devour, and In, meaning master. He is not simply named after what he does. His very name is a declaration of purpose and hierarchy. The first son of Akatosh, the dragon god of time, Alduin exists to end worlds so they can begin again. He is the mechanism of the Kalpic cycle, the universe's reset button, given consciousness and wings. What makes his story in Skyrim so cosmically interesting is that he abandoned this purpose. Rather than fulfill his function as the World Eater, the being who consumes existence to allow renewal, he chose to pursue temporal dominion over mortals. He wanted to rule Skyrim the way he had ruled it during the Dragon War. He wanted to be worshipped again. In doing so, he became something smaller and more petty than he was designed to be. The most powerful being in the world chose vanity over purpose. And his defeat at the end of Skyrim's main quest isn't really about a hero beating a monster. It's about the universe correcting a malfunction. Fact 21. Alduin is not Akatosh, though many Nords confuse them. This mistake is understandable in context. Akatosh is the dragon god of time and the head of the 9 divines in imperial religion. Alduin is described as the firstborn of Akatosh. To Nords who experienced dragon worship firsthand or heard stories of it, conflating the two is a natural error, especially since the dragon cult presented Alduin as worthy of worship on par with any god. But the texts are clear. Alduin is a creation or manifestation of Akatosh, not Akatosh himself. He's something closer to the most powerful of Akatosh's aspects than to the divine source itself. When the Dragonborn defeats Alduin, they are not defeating the dragon god of time. They're removing a wayward piece of that divine machinery that had gotten stuck in a loop of self-aggrandizement. The universe's clockwork isn't broken by his defeat. It simply corrects a deviation. Fact 22. The Dragon War was also a philosophical revolution. The Dragon War, which ended dragon dominance over Skyrim and eventually led to Alduin's banishment, wasn't simply humans pushing back militarily. What made it possible was a shift in belief. For generations, humans had accepted that dragon rule was natural and correct because dragons said so. And who was going to argue? They were massively powerful, effectively immortal, and commanded the very fabric of reality through their voices. The crack appeared when Paarthurnax defected. He went to the humans and did something no dragon had done before. He denied Alduin's divinity. He said out loud that dragons were not gods, and that their dominance was not cosmically ordained. For a creature whose entire existence was built on the idea that power equals truth, this was genuinely revolutionary. It gave humans not just a weapon, which was the Thu'um Paarthurnax taught them, but a philosophical framework for rebellion. The idea that being powerful doesn't make you right. That might doesn't constitute authority. Every human who picked up a sword against a dragon afterward was operating on the moral foundation that Paarthurnax built with that single act of intellectual courage. This matters beyond its immediate historical context, because it's the argument the whole game is built on. The Dragonborn's power comes from being part dragon. Every soul they absorb is proof that they share the fundamental nature of the beings who subjugated their ancestors. The question the game poses quietly throughout is whether having draconic power makes you like them, whether absorbing enough of their essence tilts you toward the domination instinct that dragons carry naturally. Paarthurnax spent thousands of years proving that having the capacity for a thing doesn't mean being enslaved to it. The Dragonborn has a few in-game hours to absorb the same lesson. The Dragon War never really ended. It just changed what it was about. Fact 23. The three heroes who banished Alduin couldn't kill him. Gurmlith Goldenhilt, Håkon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old, the three heroes most associated with Alduin's defeat at the end of the Dragon War, created the shout Dragonrend through their hatred of dragonkind. Dragonrend is unique in that it was made from a purely mortal concept, the understanding of mortality. Dragons, being eternal, cannot conceive of finite existence the way mortals can. Dragonrend forced that concept into a dragon's mind, briefly making them experience the crushing weight of ending. It was the only thing that could bring Alduin to Earth, but killing him proved impossible. You cannot truly slay an eternal being on the mortal plane. So, they used an Elder Scroll to displace him in time instead. They literally threw him into the future, creating a temporal wound at the throat of the world that would persist for thousands of years, until the Dragonborn opened that same Elder Scroll and looked into it, seeing the original banishment. Alduin didn't die at the end of the Dragon War. He was given a scheduling problem. He landed in 4th Era Skyrim like a missed appointment, catching up with you 3,000 years late. Fact 24. Dragon burial mounds were maintained for millennia by devotees. After the Dragon War, the surviving dragons were hunted down and killed. Their bodies were carefully preserved in burial mounds across Skyrim by faithful members of the dragon cult, who believed Alduin would one day return and resurrect them. This dedication lasted thousands of years. Even after the dragon cult's last stronghold at Forelhost was lost, isolated practitioners continued tending these graves. The Draugr you encounter guarding burial mounds aren't just generic undead. They are reanimated dragon cult members who dedicated their mortal lives to this task and are continuing it beyond death. Their undead vigil is not mindless. It is the final expression of a faith so total that it outlasted its practitioners' lives, outlasted their civilization, outlasted their very physical forms. They're still at it, still waiting, still faithful. Fact 25. Paarthurnax has been alone for thousands of years, fighting his own nature. After the Dragon War, Paarthurnax retreated to the throat of the world, and there he has remained, in near total isolation, for the equivalent of multiple human civilizations, rising and falling. But the Greybeards who visit him understand something outsiders miss. Paarthurnax isn't simply living in peaceful retirement. Every single day is a philosophical battle against his own fundamental nature. Dragons are, at their core, beings driven to dominate. The draconic instinct toward power and submission runs as deep as blood, deeper than blood. Paarthurnax fights this constantly. His famous question to the Dragonborn, asking what is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort, is not a rhetorical flourish. It's a description of his own existence. He is the universe's longest-running test of whether identity can be overcome by will. Thousands of years of restraint, thousands of years of choosing not to. Arguably the most impressive achievement in all of Skyrim's lore, more impressive than any battle. Fact 26. Dragon priests each served a specific dragon. The 8 high-ranking dragon priests of the ancient cult weren't generalized servants of dragonkind. Each one was personally bound to a specific dragon in a feudal hierarchy. Their masks, the ones you collect throughout Skyrim, weren't standardized equipment. Each one was a personal gift from their individual dragon patron, enchanted to reflect that dragon's specific domain and personality. This explains why the masks all have such varied enchantments. Ragot's mask focuses on stamina, Morokei's on magicka, Otar's on elemental resistances. These reflect not a uniform standard of dragon priesthood, but an intimate, personalized relationship between priest and patron, centuries of service rewarded with artifacts designed specifically for each individual. When the dragon cult needed to govern Skyrim and settle territorial disputes between dragons, the priests convened at what is now called Labyrinthian, the ancient city of Bromjunar, and acted as a governing council. They weren't just religious servants. They were the administrative framework of an entire civilization. Fact 27. The 10th Dragon Priest mask exists, and it requires all the others. Most players who explore Skyrim's crypts collect the 8 masks scattered across the province. Fewer know about the 9th, found in Solstheim, or the 10th. Konahrik, which means warlord in the dragon language, cannot be found in any dungeon. To obtain it, you must collect all 9 other masks and bring them to a specific shrine in Labyrinthian. There, A wooden mask lets you glimpse back through time to see the dragon cult's council chamber as it once was. Place all 9 masks on the shrine in this temporal echo, and Konahrik appears. Its enchantment is itself remarkable. When you're near death, there's a chance the mask summons a friendly dragon priest spirit to fight beside you. The dead lords of the cult called back to protect the one who finally gathered their legacy. It's the kind of detail Bethesda puts in that rewards players who go all the way. The design of this sequence is worth appreciating on its own terms. The wooden mask that allows the temporal vision costs nothing. It's just sitting there, near the shrine. But to use it meaningfully, you need to have done something that requires extensive exploration of the entire province. The reward isn't powerful enough to compel players through the mechanical challenge of collecting all 9 masks. This means everyone who gets Konahrik did it because they wanted to understand the dragon cult fully, because they were curious about what the shrine was for, because the completionist impulse or genuine lore interest source carried them through dozens of hours of dungeons. The 10th mask is, in this sense, a reward for paying attention rather than for being powerful. Bethesda's most satisfying secrets are almost always structured this way. Fact 28. Alduin's Wall at Skyhaven Temple depicts everything that happens in the main quest. Built by the ancient Akaviri people who had experience fighting dragons in their homeland, Alduin's Wall at Skyhaven Temple is a monument of predictive history. The carvings on it depict not just Alduin's past defeat, but the events of Skyrim's main questline with specific documented accuracy. The return of the dragons, the emergence of the Dragonborn, the confrontation at the throat of the world, the descent into Sovngarde. Either the Akaviri who built it had extraordinary prophetic abilities, or the Elder Scrolls universe operates under a form of predetermined destiny that these ancient scholars understood well enough to document. When the Blades spent centuries guarding this wall and waiting for a Dragonborn to appear, they weren't being irrationally faithful. They were reading a document that had already proven itself accurate and simply trusting its continuation. Part 4. The Thu'um, the voice that reshapes reality. We've touched on the Thu'um in passing several times now, because it keeps threading through everything in Skyrim's lore, but it deserves its own dedicated attention, because the more deeply you understand it, the more extraordinary everything about it becomes. Fact 29. The Thu'um isn't magic. It's something fundamentally different. When a Nord warrior uses a fire shout, a newcomer to the lore might assume this is just a form of magic with a vocal delivery mechanism. It's not. The Thu'um operates on completely different principles than any other power in Tamriel. Magic, whether cast by a mage or channeled through an enchanted item, works by drawing on magicka, which is the divine light that seeps through the holes in reality. The Thu'um works by aligning the speaker's soul with the fundamental truth embedded in a word of dragon language. When a dragon says the word for fire, it doesn't describe fire. It actualizes fire. The word is not a symbol pointing toward the concept. The word is the concept, expressed in the language that the universe recognizes as authoritative. A mortal learning this art isn't learning to speak a language. They're learning to think in one. And the process of internalizing each word is the process of making their soul resonate with a cosmic truth. Years of meditation for a single word, a lifetime of study for mastery, and the Dragonborn, absorbing knowledge from slain dragon souls in seconds, is violating the natural barrier that separates mortal minds from divine power. Fact 30. The Greybeards can accidentally destroy everything around them by speaking normally. Arngeir, the Greybeard who speaks to the Dragonborn at High Hrothgar, communicates in ordinary spoken language specifically as an act of mercy. The other Greybeards, Bori, Wulfgar, Einarth, and the ancient Jurgen Windcaller's spiritual successor, Paarthurnax at the summit, have so thoroughly mastered the Thu'um that speaking in Dovazul, the dragon tongue, even casually, would reshape the reality immediately around them. A greeting could cause avalanches. A question could shatter stone. The vibrations in even a whisper, delivered in a language that the universe takes as literal instruction, would propagate outward and cause unintended devastation. This is why they maintain near total silence, not out of monastic preference, out of necessary caution. The power they contain is so vast that the act of restraint itself is their greatest ongoing achievement. When you see them standing still in High Hrothgar, they're not being passive. They're being very, very careful. Fact 31. The Thuum was once used in agriculture, construction, and healing. The game gives players a set of combat-focused shouts, and it's easy to assume that's what the voice was always for. The lore suggests otherwise. Ancient Nords integrated the Thuum into daily life across a far wider range of purposes. Tongues used shouts to accelerate crop growth during short growing seasons, to call rain during droughts, to shape stone during construction, to communicate across vast distances before roads were established, and to provide healing that worked through the physical reality around a patient rather than through magical energy. Some of the most legendary tongues of ancient Skyrim were healers, not warriors. The reduction of the Thuum to primarily a combat application represents, in the lore, a genuine cultural decline. When Jurgen Windcaller founded the Way of the Voice and the Greybeards adopted a pacifist philosophy, they were responding to the misuse of the voice in warfare. But the equally sad consequence was that, as the combat tradition faded, so did the knowledge of the peaceful applications. By the Fourth Era, only combat shouts remain in common knowledge, and even those only through word walls in ancient tombs. The full potential of the Thuum has been reduced to a fraction of what it once was. Fact 32. Jurgen Windcaller's founding philosophy came from a military defeat. Before Jurgen Windcaller established the Way of the Voice, the Thuum was used freely by Nordic warriors and battlefield commanders. Entire armies had dedicated tongues whose function was to unleash voice-based devastation on enemy formations. The practice was effective but catastrophic in ways nobody had fully reckoned with. Reality-warping power, applied indiscriminately in battle, created consequences that went beyond winning or losing. Then came the Battle of Red Mountain in 1E700, where a large force of Nordic tongues fought against the Dunmer people and their Chimer predecessors. Despite their mastery of the voice, the Nordic tongues were decisively defeated. Jurgen Windcaller, one of the greatest tongues of his era, spent 7 years in isolated meditation afterward, wrestling with what this defeat meant. His conclusion was theological. The Thuum was not meant to be a weapon. It was a divine gift intended for worship, for philosophical understanding, for interaction with the fundamental structure of reality in a spirit of reverence rather than aggression. Using it as a casual instrument of war was a desecration. His teachings survived. The Greybeard tradition he established has outlasted every political entity, every war, every empire that has risen and fallen in Skyrim since. Fact 33. The shout used to summon the Dragonborn was heard across all of Skyrim. When the Greybeards decided to summon the Dragonborn to High Hrothgar, they shouted the name across all of Skyrim. This was not a private transmission. Every guard in every hold mentioned hearing it. Jarls discussed it with their stewards. Common people in markets and on farms reported feeling the sound move through them like a physical thing. The shout audible and palpable across the entire province, bouncing off mountains and echoing through valleys, was the Greybeards using barely a fraction of their actual power. They were choosing to get someone's attention. The minimum force required for that task was enough to shake the entire province. This single moment, more than any demonstration of shout power in combat, illustrates the scale of what the Greybeards contain. They could do significantly more than that. They simply choose not to. Fact 34. Absorbing too many dragon souls may corrupt the Dragonborn. The Greybeards' emphasis on the Way of the Voice isn't just philosophical preference. There's a practical warning embedded in their concern. Dragons are, fundamentally, creatures of domination. Their nature is to control, to subjugate, to impose hierarchy. When the Dragonborn absorbs a dragon's soul, they're absorbing not just power, but a fragment of that draconic nature. Paarthurnax hints at this concern directly, suggesting that the Dragonborn must meditate and maintain discipline to avoid having the accumulated draconic instincts begin to influence their perspective. The game doesn't show this corruption happening explicitly, but the lore suggests it's a genuine danger that enough dragon souls absorbed without proper counterbalancing practice could tilt a person toward thinking more like a dragon than like a mortal, toward valuing dominance, hierarchy, and submission. The Way of the Voice isn't just spiritual exercise. It's the mechanism by which someone with the Dragonborn's power can remain fundamentally human. There's something deeply interesting here about identity under accumulation. If you absorb 40 dragon souls by the end of a typical playthrough, you have taken 40 distinct ancient personalities and their powers into yourself. Some of those dragons were thousands of years old. Some of them had perspectives on mortality, on mortals, on the worth of human civilization that are radically different from any mortal worldview. Alduin himself viewed humans as cattle. When you absorb dragons who served Alduin faithfully, you are absorbing pieces of beings who agreed with that assessment. The Greybeard's worry is not abstract. It is specific, grounded, and, if anything, understated. Fact 35. Dragonrend can only be created by mortals who understand death. The three ancient heroes who created Dragonrend did so through a method no dragon or divine being could replicate. The shout works by forcing the concept of mortality into a dragon's mind, making an immortal creature briefly experience the crushing, disorienting weight of finite existence. Dragons genuinely cannot conceive of ending. They don't have a relationship with death the way mortals do because they have never approached it, never had to budget their time, never had to consider what they would leave undone. Dragonrend essentially installs this understanding by force, and the effect is temporarily paralyzing. A dragon subjected to Dragonrend doesn't just land physically, it lands philosophically. It has, for a moment, become something it has never been. The agony of that temporary transformation is what brings it down. The reason only the ancient heroes could create this shout, and the reason the Dragonborn can learn it, but not invent it, is that creation requires genuine experience of what the word means. You cannot make a shout about something you don't understand at a soul level. The three heroes created Dragonrend from their hatred, their grief, their intimate understanding of what it costs to be mortal, in a world where immortal beings hunt you. That specific combination of emotion and knowledge produced a weapon uniquely suited to its target. It remains one of the few things in Skyrim's lore that could only have been made by mortals, because divinity couldn't have felt what was needed to make it. Part 5. The Dark Brotherhood. Murder is sacred practice. There is no faction in Skyrim more theologically fascinating than the Dark Brotherhood. On the surface, they're assassins. Look at what's underneath and you find one of the most complete and internally consistent religious philosophies in the entire game. Fact 35. The Dark Brotherhood doesn't worship a Daedric prince. Players familiar with Skyrim's factions often assume the Dark Brotherhood must be serving some Daedric lord, the way the Thieves Guild serves Nocturnal, or the Companions' Inner Circle serve Hircine. They don't. The Brotherhood worships Sithis, the Void, the primordial nothing that existed before creation. Sithis isn't a being in any conventional sense. He is the principle of change and entropy and the ultimate end of all things. He existed before the Aeda, before the Aedra and Daedra, before the universe had a shape to have divine beings inside it. The Daedric princes, for all their terrible power, are young compared to what Sithis represents. When the Brotherhood commits a murder, they're not performing a service for a patron deity. They're hastening the ultimate return to nothingness. Each kill is prayer. Each contract is a religious act in service of a cosmic principle that predates everything, including religion itself. This is why the Brotherhood is so fundamentally different from the Thieves Guild or the Companions. It's not a guild with a patron. It's a theology that happens to operate as an assassination service. Fact 36. The Night Mother killed her own children, and this is why the Dark Brotherhood exists. The founder of the Dark Brotherhood, whose name has been lost to time, was a Dunmer woman who was a high-ranking member of the Morag Tong Assassins Guild in the Second Era. According to the Brotherhood's most sacred scripture, Sithis himself contacted her. He told her the Void was hungry for souls. He told her she was his bride, and then he asked her to prove her devotion. She murdered all 5 of her children and sent their souls to the Void, to their father. The people of her village were so horrified by this that they killed her and burned her house to the ground. 30 years later, a man heard her voice in his mind, calling herself the Night Mother. She named him the First Listener and instructed him to found a new organization, not in service to Mephala, as the Morag Tong had been, but in service to Sithis. The Dark Brotherhood was born from an act of infanticide. Every contract the Brotherhood has ever filled, every assassination across every game in the Elder Scrolls series, traces its spiritual lineage back to those 5 murders. The organization's entire existence is the echo of a mother's choice. Fact 37. The Night Mother's corpse still contains consciousness. Cicero, the eccentric jester you encounter on the road to Whiterun at the start of Skyrim, is transporting a coffin containing the Night Mother's preserved body. And the body isn't just a relic, it contains some form of genuine consciousness. The Night Mother speaks to the listener through supernatural means, conveying contracts from those who have performed the Black Sacrament and sending information that only she could access. The corpse never decays, maintained by dark magic or divine preservation, and yet it bleeds when struck. It responds. It is simultaneously dead and present. Whether the consciousness is the original woman who founded the Brotherhood, a Daedric entity wearing her form, or something entirely new that emerged from the intersection of Sithis' void and a murdered mother's ghost, the lore never definitively answers. The horror of the Night Mother is precisely that ambiguity. She has been consulted by listeners for thousands of years. She has never once explained what she actually is. Fact 38. The 5 tenets are religious law, not just guild rules. The Dark Brotherhood's operational code, the 5 tenets prohibiting members from stealing from each other, killing each other, betraying the Brotherhood, disobeying orders, or refusing contracts, aren't workplace regulations. They're sacred doctrine. Breaking them is simultaneously a practical crime and a spiritual sin. The Brotherhood has survived for thousands of years, despite being illegal in every province in Tamriel and being periodically hunted by empires. The reason is those tenets. Internal discipline enforced by those rules has prevented the organization from collapsing through infighting or betrayal the way less structured criminal enterprises routinely do. When Astrid, the leader of the Skyrim Sanctuary in the 4th Era, breaks the tenets by betraying the Brotherhood to the Empire, the consequences are immediate and total. The organization is nearly destroyed, not as punishment from Sithis specifically, but because the organizational logic that had protected it for centuries was broken. The tenets weren't just rules, they were the architecture of survival. Fact 39. The Black Sacrament is a self-selecting filter. Performing the Black Sacrament requires genuine conviction. You must create an effigy of your intended victim using their actual flesh and bone, surround it with nightshade and candles, and chant the incantation while genuinely desiring death. The Brotherhood doesn't advertise. They don't recruit openly. They respond only to people who want murder badly enough to go through this ritual with full sincerity. A half-hearted attempt produces nothing. This means the Brotherhood never wastes resources on casual requests, and law enforcement cannot set traps by sending someone to perform the ritual, because the Night Mother can apparently sense whether the desire is genuine. The ritual serves as both a communications channel and a test of intent. Only people who have reached the point where they're performing midnight rituals involving human remains are committed enough to be worth responding to. In a perverse way, this is one of the more efficient client acquisition systems in the game. Fact 40. Cicero was once a normal assassin. Cicero's apparent madness is one of Skyrim's most memorable character presentations. The jester costume, the erratic speech, the obsessive devotion to the Night Mother. What his journals reveal is a slow, heartbreaking transformation. He began as a functional, competent assassin. His decline began when he was named the Night Mother's keeper, responsible for transporting her body from Cheydinhal to other safe houses as the Brotherhood crumbled around him. One by one, his fellow assassins died or fled. His superiors were killed. His contacts went silent, and Cicero was left alone with a mummified corpse in a coffin, with no listener to receive the Night Mother's guidance, maintaining traditions that had no living audience. He talked to the corpse because there was literally no one else to talk to. His madness isn't a character quirk. It's the psychological consequence of keeping faith in an institution that had effectively ceased to exist, alone for years. By the time you meet him on the road, he's been the sole keeper of the Brotherhood's soul for over a decade. The costume isn't an affectation. It's the armor of a man who had to become strange in order to keep going. Part 6. The Daedric Princes and the Nature of Oblivion. 16 Daedric Princes. Each one rules a plane of oblivion that reflects their nature. Each one has a particular sphere of influence that defines how they interact with mortals, and each one, in the lore of Elder Scrolls, is simultaneously a divine being, a place, and a concept given consciousness. Fact 41. Each Daedric realm is literally an extension of the prince's mind. Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha is an endless library because Hermaeus Mora is knowledge accumulated and festering. Sheogorath's Shivering Isles are structured chaos because Sheogorath is the embodiment of madness given aesthetic preferences. Molag Bal's cold harbor is a frozen, desaturated reflection of Mundus drained of warmth because Molag Bal is domination made into landscape. When mortals enter a Daedric realm, they're not visiting a foreign country, they're walking inside a god's psychology. The rules of physics, time, and possibility in each realm are defined by what that prince fundamentally is. This is why surviving a visit to Apocrypha is so psychologically distorting. You're not just in a dangerous library. You're inside the mind of a being for whom all information is equally accessible and equally threatening, where every corridor leads to more knowledge that will cost you something. Fact 42. Hermaeus Mora is arguably the most dangerous prince. He doesn't announce himself with violence or obvious cruelty the way Molag Bal or Mehrunes Dagon do. Hermaeus Mora's power is patient and subtle. He collects knowledge, including knowledge that destroys those who encounter it. His realm contains every text ever written, including texts from futures that haven't happened yet. He seduces scholars and mages with the one thing they crave above all else: more information. By the time his victims realize they have become indebted to him, they're usually too deep in his influence to escape. Miraak, the first Dragonborn, spent thousands of years imprisoned in Apocrypha under Mora's control, not because he was physically restrained, but because the accumulation of forbidden knowledge had become its own cage. The Ogma Infinium, the book that grants instant mastery of skills, is perhaps the clearest expression of this. It rewards the reader with what they want, while fundamentally altering who they are in the process. Mora doesn't take anything from you that you don't give willingly. He just makes sure you want to give it. Fact 43. Sheogorath in Skyrim is actually a mortal who became a god. During the events of Elder Scrolls IV, Oblivion's Shivering Isles expansion, the hero of Kvatch helped the previous Sheogorath deal with the Grey March, the periodic reset of madness and order on the Shivering Isles. At the end of that questline, the player character underwent a process called mantling, effectively becoming Sheogorath so completely that reality couldn't distinguish between them and the original. The Sheogorath you meet in Skyrim's The Mind of Madness quest, roughly 200 years later, is that same person. A mortal who performed the role of a Daedric prince with such totality that the cosmos accepted the substitution. The hints are all over the quest, in references to specific events from Oblivion that only the hero of Kvatch would know about. In the slightly more coherent and conversational manner, this Sheogorath has compared to descriptions of the prince in older texts. This makes him unique among all the princes you encounter in the game. He's the only one who was born human, the only one who chose to become what he is rather than simply always being it. Fact 44. Meridia was once a divine being of a different category. The Daedric prince of life and light, Meridia, whose quest has you reclaim her temple and gives you the legendary weapon Dawnbreaker, wasn't always Daedric. She was originally one of the Magna Gei, the lesser divine beings who fled creation when it started costing them their power. Most of the Magna Gei escaped through the holes they tore in the sky and never looked back. Meridia, for reasons the lore presents ambiguously, became fascinated with mortals and couldn't bring herself to fully abandon the world. The other divine beings considered this aberrant. She was eventually cast out, becoming neither truly Aedric nor classically Daedric. Her resulting sphere, life and light and opposition to undeath, reflects her original associations. She was part of creation, and necromancy and vampirism represent to her a profound violation of what creation was for. Her gifts to mortals are real, and her hatred of undead serves mortal interests more directly than most princes. But she's also absolutely merciless in her methods. She doesn't value collateral damage. She wants the undead gone. What burns in the process is an acceptable cost. Fact 45. The Soul Cairn is where soul gems send people. Every enchanted weapon in Skyrim draws its power from soul gems filled with captured souls. The alchemy is convenient and the gameplay benefit is clear. The theological implication is horrifying. When a mage uses Soul Trap and kills someone, that person's soul is pulled into a gem and then slowly consumed to fuel enchantments. When the enchantment runs down, the soul isn't released. It's depleted. Where do those souls go in the interim? The Soul Cairn, an extra-dimensional plane accessed during the Dawnguard questline, is the answer. It's a gray, featureless wasteland, populated by the shades of people who had the misfortune of being killed by someone with a soul trap spell. These aren't people who made choices that led them to a specific afterlife. They're people who were in the wrong place when someone needed to fill a soul gem. They wander the soul cairn in various states of awareness, some of them barely coherent, some of them coherent enough to tell you exactly what happened and why they're there. Every enchanted sword you've ever carried was powered by a person. The soul cairn is where those people went while they were being used. Fact 46. Molag Bal created vampirism as an act of domination. The Daedric prince of domination and enslavement, Molag Bal, created vampirism not as a gift or a bargain, but as an act of violation. The original vampire in Elder Scrolls lore was a woman who was transformed against her will, the condition itself designed to make its host into a predator of their own kind, while remaining permanently enslaved to hunger. The condition spreads through blood, creating a lineage of corruption extending from that first act. Pure-blood vampires, like Serana and her family in the Dawnguard quest line, trace their lineage closer to that source and have more powerful abilities as a result. Common vampirism, which you can contract from any vampire in the world, is the disease diluted through countless generations. But every vampire, from the most elegant noble in Castle Volkihar to the ragged creature hiding in a cave, carries in their blood the echo of Molag Bal's original act. The vampire's curse reflects its creator's nature. To be a vampire is to be both predator and prisoner, dominant over mortals and yet enslaved to hunger in a way that removes the self-determination the prince supposedly grants. Fact 47. The ebony blade grows stronger only through betrayal. Mephalah's artifact doesn't care how many enemies you kill or how powerful they are. The blade grows in strength only when you use it to murder people who trust you specifically. Friends, followers, spouses, people who have given you their loyalty and believe themselves safe in your presence. Each betrayal charges the weapon further, and fully powering it requires a meaningful accumulation of people who called you friend and died by your hand. This isn't game design cruelty for its own sake. It's a theological statement about Mephalah's sphere of influence, which encompasses secrets, manipulation, and the lies that structure personal relationships. The ebony blade is the physical embodiment of the prince's observation that the people closest to you are the most useful to sacrifice. That intimacy is just leverage you haven't collected yet. Players who pursue this quest are asked not merely to fight enemies, but to decide whether friendship is real or simply an arrangement waiting to be exploited. Part 7. The Companions, the Forsworn, and the Fractures in Nordic Society. Skyrim presents itself on the surface as a land of straightforward values. Strong warriors, clear enemies, honorable tradition. The lore beneath that surface is considerably more complicated. Fact 48. The Companions originated as a genocide force. The organization you join in Whiterun, with its proud traditions and talk of honor and brotherhood, began as a revenge army. After the Night of Tears, in which snow elves massacred human settlers at Sarthal, the legendary warrior Ysgramor gathered 500 companions in Atmora to the north and returned to Skyrim not to settle but to exterminate. Their explicit purpose was the complete destruction of snow elf civilization. This is the foundation on which the companions' traditions are built. The oaths they take, the Harbinger structure, the Jorvaskr as headquarters, all of it traces back to a military campaign against an entire people. The organization has evolved significantly over millennia and now operates as a neutral mercenary force. But understanding the origin reveals that even Skyrim's most respected institution is built on a history that requires moral reckoning rather than simple celebration. Fact 49. Ysgramor's ship Jorvaskr is the actual vessel that carried the first Nords. The upturned boat that serves as the Companions' main hall in Whiterun isn't a symbolic representation. It's the actual ship. When Ysgramor and the 500 companions established their presence in Skyrim, they dragged the boat inland and built their settlement around it. The Jorvaskr has been the heart of the Companions for over 4,000 years. The tables inside it, the structure you walk through collecting quests and training, was built inside and around a vessel that had bidbilled between continents. Every time a companion trains in the yard or sleeps in the bunks below, they're inside a ship that crossed the Sea of Ghosts, carrying the first human settlers to Skyrim. The architecture is the history. Fact 50. Kodlak Whitemane despised his lycanthropy. The harbinger of the companions, the elderly leader you encounter when you join the organization, carries the beast blood. Every member of the circle, the inner group of senior companions, was infected with lycanthropy through a ritual that was supposed to enhance their combat capabilities. Kodlak underwent this ritual long ago, but by the time you meet him, he has come to regard it as a spiritual curse. The reason is specific and deeply Nordic. Lycanthropy corrupts the soul. A Nord who dies with the beast blood cannot enter Sovngarde, the Hall of Valor, that Nordic tradition promises to warriors who live and die honorably. For a man who has spent a lifetime of genuine honorable service, the prospect of being denied the afterlife he earned by a curse he accepted as a young man is devastating. His entire arc in the game is about seeking a cure not because he can't handle the power, but because he wants his soul to be clean when he dies. His funeral quest isn't really about honoring the fallen. It's about rescuing him from an eternal exile he never deserved. Fact 51. The Forsworn are not bandits. They're a displaced indigenous population. Every time the game presents a Forsworn encampment as an obstacle between you and your destination, it's papering over something considerably more tragic. The Reachmen, who became the Forsworn, are the native people of the Reach. Their ancestors inhabited that land for centuries before any Nordic kingdoms existed there. During the Great War, when Imperial troops were pulled out to fight in Cyrodiil, the Reachmen seized the opportunity to reclaim their homeland and establish an independent kingdom. It was, by multiple accounts, a reasonably stable and cosmopolitan government. Then Jarl Hrolfdir of Markarth hired Ulfric Stormcloak and a Nord militia to retake the city in exchange for allowing Talos worship. The militia retook Markarth with extreme brutality. Officials who had worked for the Reachman government were executed even after surrendering. Civilians who hadn't fought alongside the Nords were killed. Survivors fled to the wilderness and became the Forsworn. Their raids on settlements and roads aren't random violence. They're the insurgency of a people who had their homeland taken twice and their government destroyed in living memory. They are simultaneously terrorists by the legal standards of every governing body in Skyrim and freedom fighters by every standard of justice. Fact 52. The Markarth incident is why the Civil War started. The deal Ulfric made with Jarl Hrolfdir had a second part. Talos worship would be permitted in the Reach in exchange for the military assistance. When the Thalmor discovered this arrangement after the White Gold Concordat had explicitly banned Talos worship, they demanded the arrest of Ulfric and his militia. Hrolfdir, not wanting a diplomatic incident with the Aldmeri Dominion, complied. Ulfric was arrested, then eventually released. But the sequence of events created two things: a deeply aggrieved Ulfric who felt used and betrayed by both the empire he'd fought for and the Jarl he'd helped, and a radicalized Forsworn movement whose moderation had been crushed by the Nords. The Markarth incident is the exact moment you can point to and say, this is where the Civil War was made inevitable. Everything after is just the mechanism. Fact 53. Ulfric Stormcloak is classified as an unwitting asset of the Thalmor. Inside the Thalmor embassy during the infiltration quest, documents can be found detailing the Dominion's assessment of key figures in Skyrim's political landscape. Ulfric Stormcloak is categorized as an unwitting asset, meaning someone who serves Thalmor interests without knowing it. During the Great War, Ulfric was captured by Dominion agents and broken during interrogation. The intelligence he provided likely compromised people and operations. More significantly, the Thalmor recognized early on that his rebellion would serve their interests perfectly. A civil war that occupied and depleted both the Empire's and Skyrim's military resources, that prevented unified resistance to Dominion expansion, and that operated on a premise about Talos worship that the Thalmor specifically provoked through the White Gold Concordat. They don't want Ulfric to win. They don't want the Empire to win. They want the war to continue indefinitely, weakening both sides while the Dominion grows stronger. Ulfric's genuine passion for his cause, his authentic belief in Skyrim's independence and the Talos faith, is precisely what makes him useful. He doesn't know he's being played. That's the whole point. Fact 54. The Thalmor's documents reveal they designed the Concordat to cause resentment. The White Gold Concordat, the treaty that ended the Great War and banned Talos worship, is presented in broad political discourse as a humiliation the Empire had to accept to survive. The Thalmor documents obtained in the embassy suggest it was more deliberately calculated than that. The terms were designed to be humiliating enough that enforcement would breed exactly the kind of resentment and rebellion that eventually becomes the Civil War. A treaty that could be observed quietly and cause no tension would have served the empire. A treaty with a provision requiring enforcement against deeply held religious beliefs was guaranteed to fracture civil society. The Thalmor weren't just winning the war. They were setting the conditions for winning the peace by ensuring their enemies would spend the next several decades tearing themselves apart. Part 8. The Snow Elves, the Falmer, and the Price of Sanctuary. The story of the Snow Elves is one of the most genuinely tragic narratives in all of Skyrim's lore. What happened to them is not ancient and abstract. Its consequences are walking through caves hitting you with rusty weapons right now. Fact 55. The Snow Elves were once a sophisticated, beautiful civilization. Before the Night of Tears, before everything that followed, the Snow Elves were among the most accomplished and culturally refined peoples in Tamriel. Their architecture in the Forgotten Vale, the hidden location accessible through the Dawnguard questline, preserves a glimpse of what they built before their fall. Frozen waterfalls and ice formations and ancient ruins of extraordinary grace. Their knowledge of magic was significant. Their understanding of the natural world was deep. They were not primitive. They were not violent by nature. The assault on Sarthal, the Night of Tears, was calculated and specific. They were after the Eye of Magnus that lay beneath the settlement, a weapon or artifact so dangerous they felt they couldn't allow humans to control it. The civilians who died in the attack were, in the coldest terms, collateral damage in a magical arms race. None of this makes the massacre acceptable, but it changes the context entirely. Fact 56. The Dwemer deliberately blinded every snow elf who sought refuge. When Ysgramor's retribution campaign began and systematically dismantled snow elf civilization, the survivors sought help from the Dwemer. The two groups were both elven peoples, and the snow elves believed they'd found sanctuary. Instead, the Dwemer enslaved them and used a poison to permanently destroy every snow elf's vision. This wasn't an accident or a practical side effect of some other procedure. The blinding was deliberate, designed to make the snow elves utterly dependent on their Dwemer masters, unable to navigate or work without guidance. The poison was so thorough that it didn't just affect the living snow elves. It corrupted their biology at a genetic level, and every descendant was born blind as well. What you encounter as the Falmer throughout Skyrim, the hunched, feral, pale creatures in ruins and caves, are the result of thousands of years underground in darkness and slavery. They had art once, architecture, philosophy. They spoke and wrote and built beautiful things. Generations of deprivation and violence removed everything except survival instinct. The Falmer aren't monsters that were always monsters. They're what a people becomes when civilization is systematically taken from them. Fact 57. Knight Paladin Gelibor in the Forgotten Vale waited 4,000 years. During the Dawnguard questline, deep in the Forgotten Vale, you encounter Knight Paladin Gelibor, a snow elf who somehow escaped what happened to his people. He has been guarding a way shrine in the Forgotten Vale for roughly 4,000 years, alone, waiting for his brother Vurthur to emerge from the inner sanctum where he had gone to seek Oriel's bow. Gelibor doesn't know that Vurthur contracted vampirism and turned against everything they stood for. He's been alone in that frozen valley for 40 centuries, faithful to a duty that became meaningless long ago, hoping his brother would come back. He calls the Falmer outside the Vale the betrayed, because he still sees them as what they once were, rather than what they've become. When you finally meet Vurthur and discover the truth, you deliver one of Skyrim's most quietly heartbreaking resolutions. Gelibor's wait was real and faithful, and it led him here, to this. Think about the scale of that isolation. 40 centuries is longer than the entire span of written human history on Earth. Gelibor watched his civilization disappear from the outside in, had no way of knowing what happened to his people, and maintained his post anyway because it was what he'd been asked to do. He didn't know if his prayers were being heard. He didn't know if the Oriel he served still cared about this pocket of the world. He just kept the way shrine lights burning and waited. There's a specific quality to his dialogue when you speak to him that suggests he's made a kind of peace with the loneliness, not resolved it, but settled into it the way cold water settles into stone. He's not broken. He's just very, very tired in a way that only 4,000 years of specific grief can produce. He is, arguably, the loneliest character in any game I've ever encountered. And the Forgotten Vale, which preserves the beauty of what his people once built, means he has spent those 4,000 years surrounded by the evidence of everything that was lost. Fact 58. The Snow Elves' attack on Sarthal was not random genocide. The Nords, understandably, experienced the Night of Tears as unprovoked slaughter. The response, Ysgramor's retribution campaign, was framed as justice for that slaughter, and from within Nordic cultural memory, that framing made complete sense. The lore that emerges across multiple quest lines tells a different story about motivation. Beneath Sarthal lay the Eye of Magnus. The Snow Elves knew it was there. A weapon of that power, in the hands of a rapidly expanding human population, represented a genuine threat to elven civilization. The attack was targeted, not random, aimed at removing the artifact before its full power was understood or used. The extermination of civilians was a horrific cost the Snow Elves apparently decided to pay for strategic advantage. Ysgramor's retaliation, which destroyed Snow Elf civilization utterly, was a natural response to a perceived atrocity. What neither side fully understood was that the cycle they entered would eventually destroy both of them entirely. The Snow Elves disappeared through violence and transformation. The Atmorans, having accomplished their genocide, eventually became the Nords who stopped referring to themselves as Atmorans at all. Two civilizations consumed by a conflict that began with an artifact neither of them fully understood. Part 9. Hidden People. The characters who deserve more attention. Skyrim is full of NPCs who reveal extraordinary depth if you pay close attention to what they say and what the lore tells you about their history. Fact 59. Heimskr was a respected academic before the Concordat. The man standing in Whiterun's market screaming about Talos is one of the game's most annoying characters by design. The noise, the repetition, the refusal to stop. But his history, pieced together from context and his own in-game dialogue, paints a different picture. Before the White Gold Concordat banned Talos worship, Heimskr was a respected scholar in Nordic theology, specifically focused on the theological and metaphysical implications of Talos's divinity. When the ban came into effect, his academic conclusions led him to believe that suppressing this religious truth would have consequences beyond politics, that denying a genuine divine figure's status was a kind of spiritual damage to the fabric of reality. He began preaching publicly. His sermons are actually, if you analyze the content rather than the delivery, sophisticated theological arguments drawing from legitimate religious texts. The problem isn't the quality of his theology. It's that nobody wants to hear academic religious philosophy shouted in a market square. Years of being ignored, mocked, and threatened drove him toward increasingly desperate proclamations. He represents a very specific kind of tragedy, the intellectual whose expertise makes them a liability when political reality declares their field of knowledge illegal. Fact 60. Sibyl Stentor in Solitude has been advising Jarls for over a century. Among the court wizards and advisors in Skyrim's holds, Sibyl Stentor of Solitude is arguably the most remarkable. She is a vampire who has served in the Blue Palace for multiple generations, advising different rulers across decades of Skyrim's political history. Her perspective on Nordic politics is genuinely unmatched because she was there for events that exist in history books for everyone else. Most of the court knows or suspects her nature. They tolerate it because her value as an advisor and court wizard exceeds the risk of having a vampire in the building. She feeds discreetly, taking small amounts from willing donors in arrangements that involve exchanges of blood for favors. She's not malevolent towards Solitude or its rulers. She's simply someone who chose civilization over the isolation that most vampires eventually retreat into, and who has used her extended existence to become genuinely irreplaceable. What her existence says about Solitude's court is as interesting as what it says about her. This is a city that presents itself as the most civilized and politically stable in Skyrim, the seat of imperial authority, the home of the High King. And at the center of its advisory council is a vampire who has been there longer than any living human in the court can remember. Everyone knows, in that way that functional institutions sometimes accommodate uncomfortable truths, and nobody says anything because the alternative is losing institutional memory that cannot be replaced. Sibyl is what continuity actually looks like when you zoom out far enough, a deal made quietly with something that doesn't age, in exchange for advice that only experience spanning generations can provide. Fact 61. Ulfric killed High King Torrig using the Thuum. The killing that sparked the Civil War is presented with some moral complexity that's easy to miss. Ulfric's Stormcloak challenged High King Torrig to a duel according to ancient Nordic tradition. Torrig accepted, as Nordic custom required, but Ulfric used the voice during the combat, a shout that physically knocked Torrig off his feet and left him unable to defend himself, at which point Ulfric killed him with a sword. Whether this constitutes honorable combat or assassination through overwhelming supernatural force depends on your interpretation of Nordic custom. Supporters of Ulfric argue he used all tools available to him, that restricting combat to only certain powers is arbitrary. Critics argue that bringing an ability the opponent had no possible counter for removed the fundamental premise of trial by combat, which is that both participants have a meaningful chance. The Civil War started over this ambiguity, not simply over political questions of independence, over whether a duel using the Thuum is combat or execution. Fact 62. Esbern survived the Thalmor Purge through paranoia bordering on madness. The old blade hiding in Riften's Ratway lived in isolation for decades after the Thalmor systematically hunted and killed the other blades following the Great War. His survival was not luck. It was constant, exhausting vigilance that required erasing almost everything about his normal life. He changed identities regularly. He never stayed in one place long enough to establish patterns. He cataloged everyone around him as a potential threat. By the time you find him, he barely speaks coherently and treats every stranger as an assassin. This isn't paranoid personality disorder. The Thalmor really were trying to kill him. Everyone he knew in the Blades died. His caution is the only reason he's alive. And his value when you find him, his encyclopedic knowledge of dragons and Alduin and draconic lore, makes all of that caution worthwhile. The seemingly crazy old man who won't open his door is the last living repository of institutional knowledge that you desperately need. Fact 63. Maik the Liar is Bethesda speaking directly to the player. This wandering Khajiit, who can appear as early as the road outside Helgen, exists in a strange space between character and developer commentary. His dialogue references features removed from previous Elder Scrolls titles, responds to fan complaints about game mechanics, and acknowledges bugs that existed in Skyrim's development. When he mentions never finding calipers, he's referencing their removal as collectible items from Oblivion. When he talks about dragons flying backward, he's acknowledging a documented bug. His name, Maik the Liar, provides the perfect plausible deniability. Nothing he says needs to be true, which paradoxically creates space for everything he says to mean something real. He's appeared across multiple Elder Scrolls games, either meaning multiple Khajiit share this name, or this particular individual is impossibly long-lived. He is the only NPC in Skyrim who exists simultaneously in the fiction and outside it, a wink from the development team to players who understand the joke. Fact 64. The Augur of Dunlane was once a college student. The mysterious magical entity imprisoned in the depths of the College of Winterhold, the glowing ball of light that provides divination and magical insight, was once a young student named Dunlane. His curiosity led him to experiment with powers beyond his understanding and control, and a catastrophic accident transformed him into pure magical energy. He exists now as aware consciousness without physical form, capable of perception and communication, but unable to leave the specific location in the college basement. The college keeps his chamber partly as a resource and partly as a warning. His accumulated knowledge, gained through his transformed existence rather than before it, makes him genuinely valuable for research. But every consultation with him is a reminder that the path of magical ambition without wisdom has a specific and permanent destination. He is the college's conscience in the most literal possible sense, a person who went too far and never came back from it. Part 10. The Thieves Guild, Shadow Marks, and the Business of Shadows. The Thieves Guild in Skyrim is easy to dismiss as the game's Do Crimes questline. The lore layered into its operation is considerably more interesting. Fact 65. Shadow Marks are a functioning secret language. Throughout every major city in Skyrim, carved subtly near buildings, doorways, and locations of note, are symbols that only Thieves Guild members are trained to read. Each mark communicates specific information. This place is a safe house. There's valuable loot here. Danger, avoid. This building has already been robbed. There's an escape route nearby. This network of silent communication means that a guild member arriving in an unfamiliar city can survey the area and immediately access information that the city's guards and citizens don't know exists. The shadow marks represent a parallel information infrastructure overlaid on Skyrim's normal social geography. The city the guards patrol and the city a Thieves Guild member experiences are literally different places, defined by different knowledge and different priorities. The detail here, that Bethesda actually designed and populated these marks across the game world, represents the kind of environmental storytelling investment that makes Skyrim feel lived in rather than manufactured. Fact 66. The Thieves Guild's success was literally supernatural. The Guild's historically remarkable success wasn't purely the result of skilled thieves and good organization. Generations ago, the Guild struck a pact with Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Darkness, Luck, and the Night. In exchange for serving as guardians of her Twilight Sepulchre, Nocturnal provided supernatural luck that made seemingly impossible heists routine, and protected the Guild from the kind of catastrophic bad fortune that destroys most criminal organizations. When the Skeleton Key, Nocturnal's artifact that kept the Ebonmere portal open in the Sepulchre, was stolen by the corrupt Guildmaster Mercer Frey, the Guild's luck simply dried up. Their operations started failing. Members died on jobs that should have been easy. The Guild's influence in Riften deteriorated until they were barely functional. The entire main quest line of the Thieves Guild branch is about understanding that this isn't a coincidence, recovering the key, and restoring the divine patronage that had quietly powered the Guild's success for decades. When you return the key at the end, you're not just completing a quest, you're reconnecting a religion to its god. Fact 67. Maven Blackbriar actually runs Riften. The Jarl of Riften may hold the official title, but Maven Blackbriar holds actual power. She controls the Thieves Guild through financial patronage. She has connections with the Dark Brotherhood through business arrangements. She owns the Blackbriar Meadery, which employs a substantial portion of the city's population, and gives her economic leverage over the area. She has compromising information on essentially every significant figure in the city, including the Jarl's own steward. She operates through blackmail, strategic violence, and the kind of patient long-term influence that official power can't easily counteract. If the Empire wins the Civil War, Maven is appointed Jarl of Riften, finally adding official title to the control she already exercised. This appointment doesn't change anything about how the city operates. It just makes visible what was always true. She had already been running Riften. The title just makes it easier to do paperwork. Fact 68. The Khajiit caravans outside city walls are intelligence networks. The traveling merchants who set up outside Skyrim's cities, never permitted inside the walls due to Nord prejudice against Khajiit, serve a function beyond commerce. They move between holds, interact with people from every social stratum, observe political developments and military movements, and report back to Elsweyr's leadership. Their commercial legitimacy is real but secondary. Some caravans also distribute skooma, the addictive substance derived from the sleeping tree sap we'll discuss shortly, using addiction as a mechanism for cultivating informants among the local population. The scheme is genuinely sophisticated. Supply illegal narcotics, gather intelligence from compromised sources, maintain commercial cover. Every time you buy lockpicks or potions from Risad or Akari, you're participating in an intelligence operation that most players never recognize. Part 11. Curious facts, Easter eggs, and the texture of a living world. Sometimes the most delightful parts of Skyrim's lore are the smallest ones. The details that serve no plot function but make the world feel inhabited by real thought and genuine creativity. Fact 69. The gourds scattered across Skyrim are based on real Mexican squash. The physical gourds that bounce around Skyrim's kitchens and marketplaces were modeled by Bethesda's art team after Kushaw squash, a variety of squash native to Mexico that is actually used in baking recipes. Someone at Bethesda specifically studied real-world gourds to create accurate models for a fantasy game set in a Nordic-inspired world. The fact that these vegetables exist in our world adds a layer of mundane reality to Skyrim's agricultural landscape. Their terrible, hilarious physics are entirely Bethesda's gift to players who want to launch them off mountains with Fusro Da. Fact 70. Skyrim's in-game books contain more words than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy's first volume. The 337 readable books scattered throughout Skyrim contain a combined total of around 316,000 words. For reference, the Fellowship of the Ring contains approximately 177,000 words. The complete Lord of the Rings trilogy is around 576,000 words total, meaning Skyrim's in-game library represents more than half of Tolkien's entire opus. Bethesda hired actual writers to produce this content, treating world-building with the seriousness of literature. A player who did nothing but read every book in Skyrim without fighting or questing would still spend significant time engaged with the game. This commitment to textual depth is one of the core reasons the Elder Scrolls universe feels so genuinely inhabited. Fact 71. The notched pickaxe at the throat of the world is a tribute to Minecraft's creator. At the absolute summit of Skyrim's highest peak, above even the platform where the Greybeard's Parthenax holds court, there is a unique item called the notched pickaxe. This is a tribute to Marcus Persson, the creator of Minecraft, known as Notch. Both Skyrim and Minecraft released in 2011, making this an act of mutual industry respect between two games that define the same year of gaming culture. Reaching the pickaxe requires careful navigation above the normal playable space. The weapon has reasonable statistics, but its value is entirely as an Easter egg, Bethesda acknowledging that the game's landscape is large enough for multiple classics to coexist. Fact 72. Vendor inventories physically exist in hidden chests under cities. This is one of the most illuminating pieces of game design exposed to player scrutiny. When you buy or sell items with a vendor in Skyrim, you might assume their inventory is stored abstractly as data. It isn't. Each vendor's inventory physically exists in a hidden chest buried underground near or beneath each major city. These chests are outside the normal playable area, but can be accessed through specific terrain exploits. The easiest one to reach is near Dawnstar, where you can access the Khajiit Caravan Merchant's chest by using a specific spot near the Ironbreaker mine. This design choice reveals how Bethesda handles NPC inventories mechanically, actual physical containers existing in the game world, technically accessible if you know the exact geometry. It's an accidental window into game development practice, the literal nuts and bolts of how commerce works beneath the surface. Fact 73. The sleeping tree near Whiterun is theorized to be an alien spacecraft. A few minutes' walk from Whiterun stands a unique, enormous tree with strange organic material around it, unlike anything else in the landscape. Investigation reveals it produces an extraordinarily potent narcotic sap used in skooma production. The tree isn't in any botanical catalog. The organic material around it doesn't match any known Tamrielic flora. And the nature of the tree, something that appears to have come from outside the normal order of things, has led lore enthusiasts to the theory that it's not a tree at all, but some form of organism that fell from the sky and took root in Skyrim's soil. Possibly extraterrestrial, possibly extra-dimensional. A giant is living near it, apparently protecting it, which raises additional questions about how the giant came to be its guardian. The skooma connection is almost certainly coincidental. Whatever this thing is, it predates the drug trade by an indeterminate amount of time. The Elder Scrolls universe has a stranger relationship to what we'd call science fiction than most fantasy settings acknowledge. The Dwemer were essentially scientists who treated magic as physics and built machines using principles that sound more like engineering than mysticism. The constructs they built blur the line between machinery and life. The Eye of Magnus may predate the current universe. And here is a possible alien organism producing marketable narcotics in a field outside the most important city in Skyrim, and almost nobody in the game world has stopped to ask what it actually is. Urag Groshub at the College of Winterhold would probably have opinions about it if asked. The giant maintaining vigil over it doesn't seem troubled. It just keeps growing, and producing sap, and being inexplicably there. Fact 74. Skyrim's map is a real-time rendering, not a static image. When you open the world map in Skyrim, you aren't looking at a pre-rendered image. The map is a live, real-time, three-dimensional rendering of the actual game world viewed from above. This means that significant in-game events can actually appear on the map while you're looking at it. Absorbing a dragon soul creates a visible orange glow on the map surface. Powerful spell effects can sometimes be spotted from the map view. The map shows weather effects and day-night cycling because it's literally looking at the game environment from altitude, not displaying a prepared graphic. This seemingly minor technical decision represents a commitment to consistency between play and interface that most games don't bother with. Fact 75. Cheese wheels are historically accurate staple food for Skyrim's climate. The abundance of cheese wheels in Skyrim is not random. In real-world historical contexts analogous to Skyrim's, primarily Northern European medieval societies, cheese was one of the most important preserved foods. In a climate as cold as Skyrim's, with the kind of pastoral economy the province maintains, cheese production would be a major industry. It travels well, stores for extended periods when properly aged, and provides reliable nutrition through long winters when fresh food is scarce. Finding cheese in ancient ruins and bandit camps makes historical sense. Someone ate there. Someone valued this food enough to bring it with them. The physics that make cheese wheels entertainingly difficult to manage are entirely Bethesda's gift to players. The cheese itself is good historical logic. Fact 76. The Headless Horseman rides every night toward his grave, and no one knows who he is. If you're traveling at night in Skyrim, you may encounter a spectral figure on horseback, moving silently through the landscape toward the ancient Nordic burial site of Hamvir's Rest. He doesn't interact. He doesn't attack. He simply rides. Following him leads to a tomb with an unmarked grave. His identity is never revealed. His story is never explained. He is pure atmosphere, a ghost that exists outside quest structure or narrative purpose. They're only to make the night feel less safe and the world feel more haunted. Some things in Skyrim aren't puzzles to be solved. Their presence is to be felt. Fact 77. Eric the Slayer is a real tribute to a real person who died before seeing the game. In the small village of Rorikstead lives a young farmhand named Eric, who dreams of becoming an adventurer. Players can help him pursue this dream by convincing his reluctant father and contributing to his equipment. He becomes available as a follower named Eric the Slayer. This character was created as a tribute to Eric West, a Skyrim fan who died of cancer before the game's release. His family contacted Bethesda, who honored the request by including this character. Eric the Slayer is not an essential NPC. He can die permanently if he accompanies you into danger and you're careless. Some players consider this an oversight. Others see it as fitting. The character named after a young man who didn't get enough time gets to have adventures he never could, even if those adventures carry risk. Either way, he exists as a small, permanent remembrance woven into the fabric of the world. Part 12. The larger cosmic picture. Sovngarde, the Soul Cairn, and what comes after. We've covered a great deal of Skyrim's lore, but there's one final category that pulls everything together: what happens to people after they die in this world, and what the larger structure of existence looks like from a sufficient distance. Fact 78. Sovngarde is a real place, not just a myth. The Nordic afterlife, Sovngarde, the Hall of Valor, where honorable dead warriors feast in Shor's company, isn't simply a cultural belief. It's a genuine extra-dimensional realm that the Dragonborn physically visits during the main quest line. You walk through Sovngarde, you speak to its inhabitants. Ancient heroes who died thousands of years ago are there, drinking mead and waiting for the call to battle. The geography is specific and consistent with in-game descriptions. The mist that Alduin was using to feed on the souls trapped there is a physical thing you can disperse. Sovngarde is real in the Elder Scrolls universe with the same certainty that Oblivion is real, which raises the stakes of every moral choice in the game considerably. The things people in Skyrim believe about life and death aren't faith requiring courage. They're just correct information. Fact 79. Alduin was feeding on Sovngarde to grow stronger. During the events of the main quest, Alduin wasn't simply threatening Skyrim from above. He was feeding. His ability to enter Sovngarde, which is the domain of Shor and should be inaccessible to him, is tied to his cosmic function as World Eater. He was consuming the souls of ancient Nord heroes who had earned their rest, using their accumulated power to grow stronger for the final battle. This is what the Dragonborn finds when they reach Sovngarde, a realm covered in oppressive mist, its inhabitants diminished and frightened, the great hall dimmed by Alduin's predation. The final battle isn't just happening in Sovngarde for atmospheric reasons. The souls you're fighting alongside, Gurmla, Hakon, Feldar, the same three heroes who first banished Alduin in ancient times, are there because Alduin had specifically been targeting powerful warrior souls. He knew who his real enemies were. What makes this disturbing at a theological level is what it says about the afterlife's relationship to the living world. Sovngarde is supposed to be beyond the reach of mortal world threats. The Hall of Valor is a reward earned through honorable death, and the ancient texts imply it exists in a place where the struggles of Nirn cannot follow. Alduin's access to it suggests his cosmic function gives him permissions that override even divine afterlife protections. He is the World Eater, and worlds include their dead. His feeding on Sovngarde's souls is not a violation of its sanctity in his cosmological framework. It's simply continuation of his original purpose at a larger scale. Everything ends eventually. He's just doing it in the wrong order, feeding before the world is ready to be consumed. The Dragonborn's journey to Sovngarde is therefore not just the final battle. It's an argument with a cosmic mechanism that has decided to run ahead of schedule. Fact 80. Becoming a werewolf bars you from Sovngarde. This is the heart of Kodlak's tragedy, but it applies universally. Any Nord who dies with the beast blood cannot enter Sovngarde. The lycanthropy doesn't just change your body. It corrupts your soul at a level that the Hall of Valor's gatekeeping recognizes and denies. Hircine, the Daedric prince of the hunt, claims those souls instead for his hunting grounds. Companions who embrace their werewolf nature are, within this cosmological framework, trading an eternity in Sovngarde for one in Hircine's realm. Some consider this acceptable. Ayla the Huntress would make this trade without hesitation. For Kodlak, who spent his life in genuine honor and wanted the afterlife that honor was supposed to earn, it represents a profound injustice. He accepted the beast blood without fully understanding the permanent cost. Fact 81. The companion's questline is fundamentally about redemption. The werewolf arc isn't just about dealing with a power. The larger arc of the companion's storyline is about whether transformation can be undone, whether something done in youth can be corrected in age, and whether honor accumulated over a lifetime outweighs a single choice that contaminated it. The ability to cure lycanthropy exists and is discovered through the questline, but some companions refuse it. Ayla refuses. The choice is respected. The questline doesn't declare one position correct. It presents the spiritual cost of the beast blood clearly and lets individuals decide what that cost means to them personally. This is consistent with the companion's philosophy throughout. They provide context and tradition, but they don't impose values. The individual warrior decides. Fact 82. The College of Winterhold's decline reflects broader cultural distrust of magic. The college isn't just an isolated institution. Its current state of declining enrollment, limited public support, and hostile relationship with the town of Winterhold below it is the result of the Great Collapse, a catastrophic event that saw most of Winterhold fall into the sea. The common people of Winterhold blame the college. No evidence supports this attribution. The college survived because of its magical protections, which to grieving people losing their homes looks suspiciously convenient. This unfair attribution has defined the college's relationship with Skyrim's population for generations. The Mages Guild that once spanned all of Tamriel collapsed through its own corruption and accidents in previous eras, and the lingering reputation of that failure, combined with the Great Collapse, left Skyrim's only magical institution as a barely tolerated fringe organization on the province's northern edge. The college's academic quality is undiminished. Its social standing has simply never recovered. Fact 83. The Psijic Order's island sometimes disappears from the world. Artium, the island where the Psijic Order maintains their monastery, has the unusual property of being able to remove itself from normal space-time. It's done this before, vanishing for centuries and then reappearing. The Psijics themselves can walk through stopped time with casual ease, appearing in the middle of conversations that were frozen moments before and leaving the same way. They predate virtually every other magical institution in Tamriel, existing since the Merethic era. When the Psijics show up at the College of Winterhold during the main quest there, freezing time to deliver a warning about the Eye of Magnus, the message is implicit in their appearance. Whatever is happening is serious enough that beings who can exist outside time chose to intervene. Their threshold for engagement is very high. Their willingness to act here says everything. Consider the implication of an organization so powerful that it can simply opt out of the world when it has no interest in current events. The Psijic Order isn't hiding. They're not suppressed or exiled. They've genuinely engineered their own existence to be selectively present, appearing when matters reach a level of cosmic significance they find worth addressing and withdrawing when they don't. This is either the most extraordinary form of academic detachment ever developed, or an organization that has been operating on a timescale so long that most of Tamriel's history looks to them the way a single afternoon looks to a mortal. Their appearance in Skyrim is not a random cameo. Something about the Eye of Magnus specifically warranted their intervention, which means the Eye of Magnus is operating at a level of significance that the oldest magical organization in Tamriel considered worth coming back for. Think about what that means next time you accidentally activate it during the college quest line. Fact 84. The Argonians' connection to the Hist is biological, not just spiritual. The Heist trees of Black Marsh are not simply sacred to Argonians in the way that a temple or a relic might be sacred. They are biologically necessary for Argonian reproduction. Argonians don't develop their full reproductive physiology until they have licked sap from a Hist tree. Without access to Hist sap, Argonian eggs don't survive in their pools. The species' continued existence is dependent on these ancient trees, which means that Hist trees, individually ancient beyond reckoning, are not merely culturally important, but literally irreplaceable infrastructure for an entire species. The Hist also communicate with Argonians through dreams and visions, influencing the species' collective behavior in ways that non-Argonians cannot follow or participate in. During events of major conflict, the Hist have been documented actively, recalling Argonians who were far from Black Marsh, pulling them home through some mechanism that operates outside normal communication channels. The Hist predate most of what we think of as Tamrielic civilization. There are Hist trees that remember the Dawn era. Their connection to Argonians isn't just species-defining at the biological level. It means that Argonians, as a people, have a relationship with genuinely ancient sentient beings that provide them something closer to ancestral memory than any other race possesses. When Argonians dream, they're sometimes accessing the Hist's accumulated memory of events that happened long before any Argonian was alive to witness them. This explains why Argonian culture sometimes seems inscrutable to outsiders. Their relationship to time, memory, and collective identity is fundamentally different because they have a biological interface to consciousness that is thousands of years older than they are. Fact 85. The Civil War has no good ending. This is a piece of game design philosophy as much as lore observation. Bethesda constructed the Civil War questline specifically so that neither outcome is satisfying. Imperial victory maintains foreign occupation, continues Talos ban enforcement, and represents the subjugation of Nord religious freedom to political convenience. Stormcloak victory creates an independent Skyrim that is isolated, war-damaged, and significantly more vulnerable to Thalmor aggression without Imperial military support. Both sides have legitimate grievances. Both sides have significant moral failures. Both sides are, ultimately, serving Thalmor interests by fighting at all. The correct choice from the perspective of Tamriel's long-term interests might be to refuse to choose, but the game doesn't fully permit that either. Real political situations rarely offer clean solutions, and Bethesda built this conflict to reflect that. Players who expect obvious heroes and villains from this questline are making a category error. It was designed to be uncomfortable. The genius of this design is that it works on multiple levels of engagement. Casual players who just want to pick a side and feel like a hero can do that, experience their victory, and move on. Players who dig deeper find that every victory is compromised, and every choice costs something. The Stormcloak ending has Ulfric giving a victory speech about freedom, while Dark Elves in his own city continue to live in a slum with no rights. The Imperial ending has General Tullius, a man who privately disagrees with the Talos ban, maintaining it anyway because the political calculus of opposing the Thalmor right now would cost more than it would gain. Both victory speeches have hollow notes, if you've been paying attention, and both are genuinely earned victories by people who believe in what they're fighting for. The conflict is designed to feel exactly as morally complex as conflicts of this kind actually are, which is more than most games attempt. Fact 86. The Dragonborn's fate after defeating Alduin is deliberately left unresolved. Unlike previous Elder Scrolls protagonists whose futures are documented in later games, the last Dragonborn simply vanishes from historical record after the main questline. They disappear without documented cause or consequence. The Dragonborn DLC complicates this with a connection to Hermaeus Mora that some interpret as a form of servitude in Apocrypha. Some lore enthusiasts believe the Dragonborn broke free of that connection and lived out a normal life. Others believe they remained an eternal champion emerging at historical crises. The most unsettling reading suggests they're still in Apocrypha, reading in an endless library in service to the Prince of Knowledge. Bethesda made this ambiguity intentional. The character you shape through your choices doesn't get a fixed ending written for them. The story ends when you decide it ends, and what happened after belongs to you. This stands in direct contrast to the fates of previous Elder Scrolls protagonists, where later games or in-universe texts mention what happened to them. The hero of Kvatch became Sheogorath. The Nerevarine left for Akavir and was never confirmed dead. The agent who survived the events of Daggerfall went on to shape the political landscape of the Iliac Bay, but the last Dragonborn, who arguably accomplished more than any of them by defeating a being whose function was to end the world, simply ceases to appear in any document, any journal, any historical account. One interpretation is that their story is so personal and so shaped by player choice across so many playthroughs that pinning down a canonical ending would invalidate too many people's experience of it. Another is that Hermaeus Mora, who collects knowledge and records of things, may have specifically redacted them from history as a form of ownership. The most romantic interpretation: someone who absorbed that many dragon souls, who stood in Sovngarde and argued with the cosmos, simply moved beyond the frame of normal historical record. Fact 87. The Amulet of Kings was the mystical mechanism holding the empire together. The Amulet of Kings worn by every Dragonborn emperor of the Septim dynasty wasn't simply a status symbol. It was magically necessary for maintaining the barriers established by Alessia, the first Dragonborn empress, against oblivion. The ritual of Dragonfire, performed by each new emperor using the amulet, renewed those protections. When Martin Septim sacrificed himself and shattered the amulet at the end of Elder Scrolls IV, oblivion to stop Mehrunes Dagon's invasion, the barrier was permanently changed. The Daedric princes can no longer manifest in Tamriel with the physical completeness that Mehrunes Dagon achieved during the Oblivion Crisis. The protection is still there, but fundamentally different. No longer renewed by living emperors because there are no more Dragonborn emperors, and the amulet no longer exists. The Empire of Skyrim's time period is ruling without the divine mandate that made the Septim Emperors cosmically significant. And that loss of legitimacy is one of the quieter explanations for the Empire's declining influence. Fact 88. Akatosh and Auriel are the same being, experienced differently. The imperial god Akatosh, dragon god of time, and the elven god Auriel, who features prominently in the Dawnguard questline, are cultural interpretations of the same divine entity. When Empress Alessia established the 8 divines as a religious synthesis designed to unite the humans and elves under her rule, the merging of existing traditions required reconciling overlapping divine spheres. Akatosh emerged from this merger, incorporating aspects of dragon worship, the elven Auriel, and other time-related entities. This is why Auriel's bow, an elven artifact sacred to Auriel, can affect the sun, which is Magnus's whole in reality and therefore metaphysically connected to Akatosh's domain over time. The gods are not separate personalities with separate jurisdictions. They're different angles on the same transcendent reality, perceived differently by different cultures with different cosmological frameworks. Fact 89. The Dragonborn DLC reveals that Paarthurnax had a predecessor as the first traitor. Miraak, whom you eventually confront in the Dragonborn DLC, predates Paarthurnax as a dragon priest who betrayed the dragons. He lived during the height of the dragon cult's power and discovered, through Hermaeus Mora's intervention, that he possessed the Dragonborn gift. He used this power to conspire against his dragon overlords, learning to absorb dragon souls and grow powerful on the same principle you use throughout Skyrim. His fellow priest Valak discovered the betrayal and confronted him. Their battle was so catastrophically powerful that it literally reshaped geography, tearing Solstheim away from Skyrim's mainland and creating the strait that separates them today. Two people's fight was large enough to rearrange continents. Vastlok won, and Miraak was imprisoned in Apocrypha by Hermaeus Mora rather than killed, spending thousands of years in the realm of forbidden knowledge, studying and growing stronger, waiting for another Dragonborn to appear. The first Dragonborn became the first to betray the cosmic role, and his punishment was the most fitting one imaginable: an eternity in a library where every door leads to more information and none of them lead out. Fact 90. Solstheim was torn from Skyrim by two dragon priests fighting. What we now know as Solstheim, the island where the Dragonborn DLC takes place, was once a peninsula connected to Skyrim's northeastern coast. The geographic separation you see on the map, that stretch of water between the two landmasses, is the archaeological evidence of Mirak and Vahlak's duel. A battle between two supremely powerful individuals, both wielding the Thu'um at its most devastating, caused enough tectonic disruption to physically detach a piece of land from a continent and push it into the sea. The Skal people who live on Solstheim have preserved stories of this ancient division in their oral tradition without fully understanding the cause. They know the land was changed. They know something enormous happened. They've been living on the scar ever since. Fact 91. The Khajiit's form at birth is determined by the lunar lattice. We touched on this earlier, but the implications go deeper than simple biology. The Khajiit form isn't just physically determined by the moons, it's metaphysically determined. The lunar lattice, as the Khajiit call the combined pattern of Maser and Secunda's positions, is a cosmic mechanism that channels specific aspects of divine essence into the world at different points. Different lunar configurations produce different Khajiit forms because different configurations channel different aspects of what a Khajiit fundamentally is. This means that the physical diversity of Khajiit society, from enormous cat-like warriors to small, nimble, human-looking individuals, isn't random variation. It's cosmic specialization. The moons are curating the species through their positions. And when the moons disappeared during the Void Nights, this mechanism simply stopped, and no Khajiit could be born at all. Fact 92. The Companion's founding oath traces directly back to the original 500. When you take oaths as a companion, those oaths aren't new traditions invented when the organization settled in Whiterun. They are, with some evolution and interpretation across 4,000 years, the same oaths sworn by Isgramor's original 500 warriors in Atmora before they set sail. The Harbinger title specifically traces to this original group. The ceremonies observed inside the Jorrvaskr reference events and figures from a campaign so ancient that even the extended written history of Tamriel treats it as mythology. There are traditions maintained in the Companions that nobody still in the organization fully understands because the context that made them meaningful has been lost to time. They keep them anyway. That continuity, the thread connecting present practices to ancient origins, is the actual substance of the organization's identity. Fact 93. Lorkhan's heart under Red Mountain continued to pulse for thousands of years. The heart of Lorkhan, discovered by Dwemer miners and later central to the catastrophic events of the Battle of Red Mountain, continued to exist and to function as a source of immense divine power for thousands of years after Lorkhan's death. In The Elder Scrolls III, Morrowind, events involving the Tribunal, the three god kings of the Dark Elves, and the Nerevarine hero eventually result in the heart being destroyed. But during all of Skyrim's history, during the entire Fourth Era when Skyrim takes place, the heart is gone. Its absence changed things. The Tribunal's divine power depended on the heart. Without it, they could no longer sustain their divinity. The political and religious structure of Morrowind changed fundamentally as a result. Skyrim's timeline exists in a world where a dead god's heart was destroyed, and the ripples of that destruction touch politics, religion, and magic across all of Tamriel, even if nobody in Skyrim is talking about it directly. Fact 94. The Dunmer were physically transformed as punishment for their leaders' crimes. The Dark Elves you encounter in Windhelm's Grey Quarter, with their distinctive gray skin and red eyes, weren't always this way. Their ancestors were the Chimer, who had golden skin and golden eyes. The Chimer's leaders, the individuals who would become the Tribunal, murdered the hero Nerevar, who was their friend and ally, and stole divine power from the heart of Lorkhan. Azura, the Daedric prince of dawn and dusk, and a patron of the Chimere, cursed the entire race in response. She transformed their golden appearance to ash gray and changed their eyes to red, making them permanently visually distinct from other elves as a reminder of their leader's betrayal. The Chimeri people had no part in the Tribunal's crime. They were changed anyway, as collective punishment for actions taken without their knowledge or consent. Every dark elf in Skyrim, in Windhelm, and in the College of Winterhold, and in the Ratway, carries this curse in their appearance. Their physical form is evidence of something that happened before their great-grandparents' great-grandparents were born. Fact 95. The blades were originally from Akavir. The dragon hunting order that serves as key allies in the main quest line didn't originate in Tamriel. The blades trace their lineage to the Akaviri, the inhabitants of a mysterious eastern continent who invaded Tamriel in the distant past, specifically seeking to destroy dragons. Their invasion failed militarily, but some Akaviri remained in Cyrodiil and eventually formed what became the Blades. This explains their distinctive armor, which doesn't resemble anything else in Tamriel's design traditions, and their fighting styles, which incorporate techniques developed over centuries of dealing with draconic threats in their homeland. The Akaviri apparently knew more about dragons than anyone in Tamriel, possibly because their own continent had dragons that they'd spent generations learning to fight. When the Blades eventually became bodyguards for dragonborn emperors rather than active dragon hunters, they were an organization from another continent that had become essential to protecting an empire they'd once tried to conquer. Fact 96. The Thieves' Guild has been in existence across multiple eras. The organization you join in Riften isn't a recent development. The Thieves' Guild has existed in some form since at least the Second Era, appearing across multiple Elder Scrolls titles in different provinces and under different leadership. Their consistent thread across the centuries is the relationship with Nocturnal and the Nightingale Pact, which predates Skyrim's timeline by centuries. Gallus Desidenius, the murdered guildmaster whose death Mercer Frey covered up, was himself a Nightingale who had taken the same oath you take in the quest line. The institutional memory of the guild, its traditions, its methods, its divine patronage, is older than most governments currently operating in Tamriel. The Ratway beneath Riften is just the current address. Fact 97. Falmaroon is a real place in Blackreach. Deep in Blackreach's most remote sections, there are areas so thoroughly colonized by the Falmer that they've begun constructing primitive structures, small settlements that represent the first architecture the species has produced in thousands of years. They have no memory of what they once were, no tradition preserved from their time as snow elves, no echo of the sophisticated civilization their ancestors built. But the instinct to build, to create shelter and establish territorial markers, survives even after everything else has been stripped away. It's one of the quietest and most heartbreaking pieces of environmental storytelling in the game. Somewhere inside the degraded feral Falmer is the very distant echo of a people who built beautiful things in frozen valleys. They're building again, clumsily, in the dark. They don't know why. Fact 98. Paarthurnax's question has no comfortable answer. The most famous piece of dialogue associated with the Paarthurnax moral choice, his question about whether it is better to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort, is not rhetorical. He is asking about himself. He was Alduin's chief lieutenant during the Dragon War. He committed, by his own admission, acts against humanity that he refuses to fully describe. He chose differently afterward, not because he stopped being capable of those acts, but because he decided his capability didn't determine his choices. The player decision about whether to kill Paarthurnax or spare him is genuinely one of the most morally resonant choices in the game, because neither answer is obviously correct. Kill him. Thousands of years of demonstrated growth and restraint mean nothing in the face of what he was. Spare him. Every individual deserves the consequences of what they choose, not what they were made to be. Both positions are philosophically defensible. The Greybeards support sparing him. The Blades support killing him. Neither side lacks a coherent argument. Fact 99. The Eye of Magnus was what the Snow Elves attacked Sarthal to claim. We've discussed the Night of Tears, but the specific motivation deserves its own entry because it reframes the entire chain of events that shapes Nordic civilization. The Snow Elves didn't attack a human settlement because they feared human population growth in the abstract. They attacked a specific settlement because they knew what was buried beneath it. The Eye of Magnus represents power, sufficient to alter reality on a continental scale. In the hands of a rapidly expanding species they'd never had to coexist with before, an artifact of that magnitude was an existential threat. Their response was catastrophic and wrong in its methods. but the strategic logic is coherent. Remove the threat before it can be used. The Night of Tears, which led to Ysgramor's retribution campaign, which led to the extermination of Snow Elf civilization, which led to the creation of the Falmer, was ultimately a chain reaction triggered by an artifact that the Snow Elves never possessed and that humans didn't understand for thousands of years afterward. Fact 100, Blackreach has multiple named zones that most players never see. Most players who enter Blackreach are on a specific quest objective. Find the Elder Scroll, interact with the Great Lift, navigate toward a specific destination. The cavern is enormous, containing multiple distinct architectural zones, Dwemer engineering marvels of various types, and areas that exist simply because the Dwemer built them for purposes we can no longer determine. The agricultural district, the war quarters, the debate hall, where Volthuriol can be summoned, all of these are named spaces representing the remains of what was once an underground city populated by an entire civilization. Blackreach isn't a dungeon in the conventional sense. It's a city that happens to currently be empty and structurally hostile. The scale of what the Dwemer built underground, the fact that this single cavern could house a functioning urban center, is the clearest demonstration of what they could do. Fact 101. The Morag Tong predates the Dark Brotherhood and is still legal in Morrowind. While the Dark Brotherhood operates in shadows across all of Tamriel, the organization it split from in the Second Era is still, officially, a legal institution in Morrowind. The Morag Tong performs religiously mandated killings under writs issued by appropriate authorities, operating within the law in a way the Dark Brotherhood explicitly rejects. Both organizations share similar origins and techniques. Their philosophical divergence is fundamental. The Morag Tong believes in structured, lawful death. The Dark Brotherhood believes in death's chaotic inevitability and serves Sithis directly rather than any governmental framework. They're rivals despite shared ancestors. Their coexistence demonstrates that the same principle, death as a service, can be organized in completely opposite ways depending on what you believe about the nature of authority and the cosmos. What's fascinating is how each organization reflects its home environment. The Morag Tong emerged from Morrowind, where the tribunal god kings maintained a legal and social structure so thorough that even assassination could be regulated and legitimized. The Dark Brotherhood emerged from the fragmentation of that order, from a period when the legal mechanisms that gave the Morag Tong its framework were collapsing. One organization is a product of stability taken to its logical extreme. The other is a product of what emerges when that stability fails. When you meet members of either organization across the Elder Scrolls games, you're seeing this philosophical division made human. People who believe that death serves order versus people who believe death serves something older and larger than order could ever contain. Fact 102. The Reaper guards the Soul Cairn, and no one knows who created him. Deep in the Soul Cairn, accessed during the Dawnguard questline, there's a hidden boss encounter with a being called the Reaper. To summon him, you must find 3 gem fragments and bring them to a specific altar. The Reaper appears to function as the warden of this afterlife plane, a powerful entity ensuring the trapped souls remain contained. He's not a Daedric prince. He's not a named figure from any known mythology. He exists in the Soul Cairn doing something important, and his origin, his authority, his creator are never explained. Questions about the Soul Cairn's structure proliferate from this encounter. Was it designed, and if so, by whom? Is the Reaper a natural consequence of the Soul Cairn's existence, or was he placed there? Does he serve a master we've never encountered, or did he emerge from the accumulated spiritual energy of trapped souls, the way a consciousness might emerge from a sufficiently complex system? Fact in 103. Cicero and the Night Mother may have saved the Dark Brotherhood from extinction. When the Dark Brotherhood's presence collapsed across most of Tamriel in the years before Skyrim's events, the organization came perilously close to simply ceasing to exist as a functioning institution. Cicero, alone with the Night Mother's coffin and maintaining the traditions with no audience, was effectively the entire Dark Brotherhood in a period when the organization had no other active members. His preservation of those traditions, his maintenance of the Night Mother's remains, his refusal to abandon the faith even in the absence of any practical benefit, meant that when you and Astrid and the Falkreath Sanctuary encountered him, there was something still to return to. The organizational knowledge, the ritual details, the theology, all of it survived because one unstable person took seriously an assignment nobody else was still alive to honor. For all his unsettling qualities, Cicero may have been the most important member of the Dark Brotherhood in the Fourth Era, simply by continuing to exist. Fact 104. Dragon souls change the Dragonborn's speech patterns over time. This is more subtle lore than explicit game mechanic, but it's supported by careful reading of dialogue and Greybeard interaction. As the Dragonborn accumulates dragon souls, they begin to have an easier time with Dovazul, the dragon language. Not just mechanically with learning shouts faster, but linguistically. Their engagement with the language changes. The Greybeards notice this. Paarthurnax references it. The concern about dragon souls influencing the Dragonborn's nature isn't just about instincts toward dominance. It's about language-shaping thought. If you begin thinking in a language that treats all utterances as actualities rather than representations, your relationship to power, truth, and consequence changes. This is one of the reasons the Way of the Voice emphasizes meditation so heavily. The Greybeards spend years internalizing each word precisely to understand its full meaning before using it. The Dragonborn absorbs this understanding instantly, without that grounding. The risk is not just power misused, but reality misunderstood. Fact 105. The companions will always have a harbinger, but never a guildmaster. Unlike the Thieves' Guild or Mages' College, the companions don't use the term guildmaster or have an equivalent hierarchical authority. The harbinger is literally a herald, someone who speaks on behalf of the companions and holds traditions, but who has no formal authority over individual members. This structure is not an oversight. It's intentional policy dating back to the founding. The companions serve themselves and their contracts, not a governing body. Any member can take any job they choose. The harbinger provides guidance and maintains unity through respect, not command. This is why the companions can remain politically neutral during the Civil War, in a way that more hierarchically structured organizations cannot. There's nobody at the top who can commit the organization to a side, because there is no top, just a voice. Fact 106. Nirin has evidence of other landmasses that players never see. Tamriel, the continent where all Elder Scrolls games take place, is only one of multiple continents on the planet of Nirn. Akavir to the east is the home of the Akaviri people who became the Blades. Atmora to the north, now mostly a frozen wasteland, was the origin point of the Nords. Yokuda to the west, now mostly sunken beneath the ocean, was home to the Redguards before a catastrophe destroyed most of it. Pyandonea to the southwest is home to the Maormer, sea elves who appear rarely in the games. These other continents exist in the lore as the backdrop to Tamriel's history, but have never been playable. Tamriel is therefore not the world. It's a world in a world, the best documented portion of a planet whose full geography is substantially larger than any game has let us explore. Fact 107. The College of Winterhold holds actual academic lectures. This is a piece of game design that most players miss because it requires being in the right place at the right time. The Masters of Magic at the college hold actual scheduled lectures in their areas of expertise. Faralda lectures on destruction magic, Drevis on illusion, Colette on restoration, with a certain touchiness about whether restoration counts as real magic. These lectures happen at specific times during the day, and if a dragon attacks or other significant danger arises, they're canceled for 24 hours before resuming. The students aren't just standing around waiting for the Dragonborn to arrive and initiate a conversation. They're attending school. The college operates as a functioning educational institution with a schedule, and that schedule continues whether or not you interact with it at all. Fact 108. The vampire Serana can tell you significant things about pre-recorded history. Serana, the companion in the Dawnguard questline, who was sealed in a sarcophagus for thousands of years, has a unique perspective on Skyrim's history. She was alive and active during periods that exist only as archaeological evidence and fragmented texts. Her casual references to how things were when she was last awake, the political landscape, the roads, the social structures, are small windows into eras that nobody living has direct knowledge of. She remembers the Dragon War period from the outside, as a contemporary rather than as a historian. Her adjustment to the Fourth Era, trying to understand what has changed and what is familiar, is one of the Dawnguard questline's quieter pleasures if you take the time to listen. Fact 109. The entire main quest line is technically optional. Skyrim allows you to simply not do the main quest. You can ignore the dragon attacks, decline to visit the Greybeards, refuse to engage with the events at Helgen beyond escaping. The world doesn't force the Dragonborn narrative on you. Alduin continues resurrecting dragons. The civil war continues. People continue their lives. The ending implied by not completing the main quest is a world where the last Dragonborn existed, but chose not to fulfill the prophecy, and the Alduin problem was either solved some other way or simply wasn't. This optional nature is itself a philosophical statement, consistent with the Elder Scrolls design philosophy. The world exists independently of the player's participation in it. You are not the hero of this story unless you choose to be. Fact 110. Falmaroon is spelled and named in game, suggesting the Falmer have a cultural identity. A location in Blackreach is actually named Falmaroon, suggesting either that the Falmer have named it themselves, which would require a level of linguistic capacity the game otherwise presents them as lacking, or that the Dwemer named it during their occupation in recognition of a Falmer population center. Either interpretation is interesting. If the Dwemer named it, they were acknowledging a specific geographic area associated with their slaves, treating them as a defined group with territorial presence even while enslaving them. If the Falmer named it, something of their linguistic capability has survived the millennia underground, fragmented but present, the ghost of a culture that was systematically destroyed but not quite completely. Fact 111. All Daedric artifacts carry spiritual costs. Every Daedric quest in the game ends with an artifact, and every artifact comes with a price that isn't always visible in the item description. The Ebony Blade's requirement that you betray people to power it, Namira's ring enabling cannibalism, the Wabbajack's radical unpredictability, the Skull of Corruption draining the dreaming minds of others. Even the apparently benign Dawnbreaker carries Meridia's expectation of ongoing service, and her particular ruthlessness about how undead are handled. Daedric princes don't give things freely. Every artifact is a statement about the prince's nature, and using it makes you, incrementally, more like them. The artifacts aren't just powerful tools, they are philosophical invitations to become something specific. Fact 112. The Civil War's most honest character might be General Tullius. Ulfric Stormcloak is passionate and genuine about his cause, even if he's been manipulated into serving the wrong interests. The Emperor's emissaries are bureaucratic and political. But General Tullius, the Imperial commander, is perhaps the most pragmatically clear-eyed character in the whole conflict. He doesn't believe in the Talos ban. He's said to personally disagree with the White Gold Concordat. He's doing his job because he understands that a functioning empire is better than a fractured one, even with this problematic treaty, and because someone has to maintain order. His lack of ideological fire makes him appear less interesting than Ulfric, but arguably more trustworthy. He's not using you for a theological crusade. He's just trying to stop a war that's killing people and weakening a civilization that needs to be strong. Fact 113. The phrase, "Do you get to the Cloud District very often?" is an accidental piece of class commentary. Nazim, the Whiterun merchant who asks this question in a tone designed to make you feel excluded, is a property owner of some standing, but not actually of the nobility. His aspiration to the upper echelons of Whiterun society, expressed through condescension toward people he considers beneath him, is a snapshot of a very specific social type, the upwardly mobile merchant performing confidence he doesn't quite have. He works at Chillfurrow Farm, but talks about the Cloud District as though he's a regular there. The game never explicitly interrogates this, but his character is one of those small touches that make Skyrim feel populated by recognizable human patterns rather than quest delivery mechanisms. Fact 114. Ysgramor's tomb is the proper endpoint of the companion's questline, the final ritual of the companion's storyline, in which you enter Ysgramor's tomb to release Kodlak's wolf spirit and send him properly to Sovngarde, takes place in the burial site of the man who founded the organization 4,000 years ago. Ysgramor's ghost is present in the tomb, having never truly left it. The organization that began with his vision ends each of its most significant transitions in his presence. The burial mound isn't a set piece chosen for atmosphere. It's the organizational headquarters in the most literal sense, the home of the founder, who has been waiting there since he was interred and who is still, in some form, witness to what his people are doing with the tradition he created. Fact 115. The Nordic cosmological understanding of death is more accurate than most. Sovngarde is real. The Hall of Valor is real. Shor is a real being in that real place, receiving the souls of Nord warriors who meet their cultural criteria for admission. This is just true in the Elder Scrolls universe, not a matter of faith requiring courage. What makes Nordic cosmology interesting is that it's also incomplete. Sovngarde isn't the only afterlife. It's the Nord afterlife. Other cultures have other destinations. The Khajiit have Lesweir, the Senche's afterlife. The Dunmer have the Dreamsleeve as an intermediate state before the soul moves elsewhere. The Imperials have complicated doctrines about Aetherius. Each one is real within its own context. The universe has built different afterlives for different people based on what those people believe, which suggests either that the cosmological structure is responsive to belief, or that some deeper mechanism sorts souls to their expected destinations, regardless of objective truth. Fact 116. The Dunmer and Windhelm have been there for 200 years. The Grey Quarter, where dark elves live in poverty and face institutional discrimination in Windhelm, was established by Dunmer refugees who arrived after the Red Year in 4E5, when Red Mountain's eruption devastated Morrowind. That was 200 years before Skyrim's events. Multiple generations of dark elves have been born in Windhelm, having never seen Morrowind. Speaking Nord as a first language, growing up as Skyrim residents in every sense except the one that matters to the Nords who govern the city. They're not immigrants anymore. They're residents who have been residents longer than most Nord families in the city have had their current houses. The discrimination they face has nothing to do with them being foreign. It's simply habit, the kind of prejudice that becomes invisible to the people practicing it because it's been there so long it reads as natural. Fact 117. Lydia is mortal in a specific way that teaches something. Most important quest-related NPCs in Skyrim are flagged as essential, meaning they cannot die and will simply fall unconscious if reduced to 0 health. Lydia, the housecarl given to you when you're named Thane of Whiterun, is not essential. She can die. She can be killed accidentally by your own fire breath or lightning bolt landing in the wrong place during combat. She doesn't come back. The game provides no special alert. You check your follower list, and she's gone. This design decision creates genuine stakes. She's valuable because she's vulnerable. The care you take to keep her alive is proportional to the fact that you know you can fail too. She transforms from a quest-delivered companion into someone you're responsible for. Fact 118. Windhelm is the oldest continuously inhabited city in Skyrim. Founded by Ysgramor himself after the Night of Tears, Windhelm is simultaneously the oldest city in the province, and the one most clearly carrying its history as burden rather than asset. The original stone of Ysgramor's construction still forms the core of the Palace of the Kings. The city was built to commemorate a specific moment of founding myth, and it has never quite updated itself from that moment. The racism baked into its treatment of dark elves and Argonians, the Stormcloak nationalism that pervades its culture, the suspicion of outsiders, all of it is the natural result of a city that has venerated its own founding so completely that it has no mechanism for incorporating anything new. Age and tradition are real values, but a city that mistakes stagnation for continuity pays a different kind of cost. Fact 119. The War of the Crag in Blackreach was the Falmer rebellion against the Dwemer. The Snow Elves, forced into servitude underground and blinded by deliberate poisoning, eventually rebelled against the Dwemer in a conflict called the War of the Crag. They fought it blind, in the darkness of caves they had been living in for generations, against one of the most technologically advanced civilizations ever to exist. They didn't win in any conventional sense. But the Dwemer disappeared before the war could be concluded, and in the aftermath the Falmer, finally without their masters, had Blackreach and the surrounding underground to themselves. The victory, if it can be called that, came from someone else's catastrophe rather than from the Falmer's own efforts. There's a particular cruelty in this. They never got to win. They just outlived their oppressors. Fact 120. The Greybeards do not age normally. Masters of the Thu'um who dedicate themselves to the way of the voice can extend their lifespans significantly through the meditative practices associated with the philosophy. The Greybeards at High Hrothgar have been there for decades, in the cases of the most senior members potentially for centuries. with their aging slowed dramatically by the same practices that allow them to contain reality-altering power. This isn't the immortality that vampirism or lichdom provides. It's a genuine, earned slowing of mortality through discipline. Arngeir doesn't know exactly how long he's been at Higher Hrothgar. The question has simply stopped mattering the way it matters to people whose lives fit inside a normal human span. Fact 121. The Wabbajack is a perfect artifact of madness. Sheogorath's artifact works on genuinely random principles with no underlying pattern. A single use might transform an enemy into a sweet roll. It might summon hostile Daedra. It might turn the target into a pile of gold coins, or a chicken, or a storm Atronach, or any of dozens of other outcomes. No two uses guarantee the same result. This is not a design oversight. The Wabbajack's radical unpredictability reflects Sheogorath's nature as the embodiment of madness itself. The artifact actively resists being understood or used tactically. It rewards abandonment of planning. It punishes the kind of careful strategic thinking that works everywhere else in the game. To use the Wabbajack effectively, you have to stop trying to use it effectively and simply let whatever happens happen. Fact 122. The Forsworn Briarhearts have had their hearts physically removed. The most powerful Forsworn warriors, the Briarhearts, underwent a ritual transformation that involved having their human heart surgically removed and replaced with a Briarheart, a magical fruit from a specific plant sacred to Forsworn culture. This gives them enhanced power, but is visible as a sunken chest depression when you see them. More interestingly, you can pickpocket the Briarheart from a living Briarheart, and doing so immediately kills them because they have no original heart to fall back on. The heart is literally their life. Remove it, and they collapse. This pickpocketing option is one of Skyrim's more inventive approach alternatives to combat. Fact 123. Nchuin Zell in Markarth tells a complete story through environmental evidence. The dwarven ruin beneath Markarth contains the remains of an imperial expedition that went inside and never came back. By finding scattered journals and notes, players can piece together exactly what happened. A group of explorers went in, encountered the Dwemer automatons still defending the ruins, fought desperately, and were overwhelmed one by one. The last journal entry is from the expedition leader, Calselmo's assistant, describing making a final stand in the deepest chamber. No quest marker guides you to these notes. No quest tells you to find them. The story exists for players curious enough to read everything they find, which is how the best environmental storytelling works. Fact 124. The Ogma Infinium changes who you are, not just what you know. Hermaeus Mora's Book of Infinite Knowledge, which the game presents as a skill-boosting artifact, doesn't operate through any kind of normal learning process. The knowledge it imparts is forcibly integrated, overriding existing neural pathways, reorganizing consciousness to accommodate information that wouldn't fit there otherwise. The person who reads the Infinium and chooses a path emerges with that path's knowledge fully integrated, but they're not quite the same person who opened the book. The self that would have developed those skills through practice and experience has been replaced by a self that possesses the skills but has no relationship with acquiring them. Mora doesn't give knowledge freely. He trades the person who didn't have the knowledge for a different person who does. The reader always pays with some part of themselves. Fact 125. The Forsworn King has been in prison for the entire game's timeline. Modonach, the king in rags, the leader of the Forsworn, has been imprisoned in Sidna Mine in Markarth for years before Skyrim begins. He wasn't executed after the Markarth incident because Thonar Silverblood, one of Markarth's most powerful merchants, recognized that keeping Modonach alive in secret gave him leverage over the remaining Forsworn in the hills. Modonach continues to lead his people through the prison, directing operations through a network of informants and messengers. The Forsworn King isn't in a mountain fortress plotting revenge. He's been in a mine doing forced labor while secretly running an insurgency. When you encounter him during the quest, the Forsworn conspiracy, he's been doing this for years. The situation is almost admirable in a grim way. A man maintaining political leadership and genuine authority from inside a cage where his jailers think they've neutralized him. Fact 126. The Dawn Guard existed before the questline begins. The organization dedicated to fighting vampires that you can join during the Dawn Guard questline is not newly formed in response to the threat. The Dawn Guard has existed before, been dormant, and been reactivated under Isran specifically to respond to the rise in vampire activity preceding the questline. Isran himself is a former member of the Vigil of Stendar, who broke with their methods, finding them insufficiently aggressive against vampire threats. He's been building toward this reconstitution independently. By the time you arrive at Fort Dawnguard, Isran has already been recruiting and preparing for some time. The Dawnguard questline isn't about creating a new organization. It's about reviving an old one at exactly the right historical moment. Fact 127. Karjo's Moon Amulet is a side quest with real emotional weight. The Khajiit caravan guard Karjo carries an amulet of his deceased mother that was stolen. Returning it to him, which requires clearing a specific dungeon, yields a follower relationship and the kind of small personal resolution that Skyrim manages better than most games. There's no grand consequence, no political ramification. A person lost something that mattered to them, and you gave it back. His dialogue after the return is quiet and grateful, in a way that feels human rather than scripted. These small completions, outnumbered but not overwhelmed by the main narrative, are what make the world feel full. Fact 128. The companion's werewolf origins trace directly to the companion's Glenmoral Witches deal. The companion's association with lycanthropy didn't happen accidentally or through contact with a random werewolf. Historically, the inner circle of the companions made a deliberate deal with the Glenmoral Witches, a coven in Skyrim with connections to Hircine. In exchange for enhanced combat capabilities, the circle accepted the beast blood. This deal was made not once but was a continuing arrangement, with new circle members being deliberately infected as part of their initiation. For generations, the companions had been doing this knowingly, weighing the combat advantage against the spiritual cost without fully reckoning with the latter. The corruption wasn't imposed on them, they chose it. And the questline's arc, in which Kodlak seeks a cure, and the player can choose whether to pursue it, is about whether an institution can reckon honestly with choices made by predecessors on behalf of those who came after. Fact 129. The Dragon Cult's administrative system was more sophisticated than a theocracy. We've discussed the Dragon Cult's hierarchy of priests and patron dragons, but the system goes deeper than simple religious governance. The dragon priests at Brumjunar, convening to settle territorial disputes between dragons, were operating something closer to an international law tribunal than a church council. The system recognized that dragons had competing territorial claims. It provided a structured mechanism for resolution rather than simply allowing the strongest dragon to dominate. This suggests the dragon cult, at its height, had developed real institutional logic, a way of managing relationships between apex predators using a human intermediary class as the mechanism. The collapse of this system in the Dragon War wasn't just a military defeat. It was the destruction of a governing structure that had actually provided stability for centuries before it became corrupted. Fact 130. Everything in Skyrim is someone's history. This is not a specific lore fact, but it is perhaps the most important observation about the game. Every ruin has a story. Every book has an author. Every abandoned camp has someone who left it. Every grave has a person who earned it. The reason Skyrim remains compelling more than a decade after its release, the reason this many facts exist to discuss, is that Bethesda's writers treated every corner of the game as having backstory, whether or not players would ever read it. The snow elves who built the Forgotten Vale are gone, but the Vale remembers them. The Dwemer who maintained Blackreach are gone, but the mushrooms still glow. Ysgramor's crew who first crossed the Sea of Ghosts are long dead, but the Jorvasker still floats above Whiterun's Wind District, showing you the hull of their ship. The past never fully leaves in Skyrim. It just goes quiet and waits to be noticed. Consider what this means at scale. There are ruins in Skyrim whose occupants died before writing was invented. There are stories embedded in architecture that have no surviving text to explain them. There are people who lived entire lives, built homes, loved people, lost wars, and vanished before a single written record of them existed, and yet the walls they built remain. Archaeology as quiet testimony. Every Draugr guarding a burial mound has a name somewhere in the lore, or at least a category. A warrior who died in a specific era, for specific reasons, and was given this specific resting place because of what they believed. The game would function just as well as a game if none of this backstory existed. The developers included it anyway, because they believed, correctly, that a world feels different when it has been thought about this carefully. This is why people return to Skyrim year after year, on different platforms, in different seasons of their lives. The world holds still and lets you come back to it. It doesn't change because you've been away. The mountains are where they were. The ruins haven't moved. The graybeards are still practicing their careful silence. And somewhere on the throat of the world, older than almost everything else in the province, Parthenax is still asking his question and living his answer, every single day, for thousands of years. That's the thing about Skyrim that no number of lore facts can fully capture, but all of them together gesture toward. It is a world made with genuine love for the idea of a world. And worlds made with that kind of love have a quality that just feels different, even at 2 in the morning, when you can't quite sleep, and you've decided to spend some time in the cold dark with someone reading you old stories. The snow falls the same way it always has. The aurora moves across the sky the way it did before anyone was there to name it. Somewhere below the ice, in the dark tunnels of Blackreach, a little light still pulses from mushrooms that shouldn't exist. It's enough. Go to sleep. And there we are. 130 facts from a world that never stops giving them up. We went from the creation of the universe to the moons as a dead god's body, through the Dwemer's impossible engineering and their instantaneous vanishing, through dragon wars and philosophical rebellions, through the Night Mother and Sithis and the theology of assassination, through the snow elves who were beautiful once, through Parthenax fighting his own nature on a frozen mountain, through Cicero alone with a coffin in the dark, through a forsworn king directing an insurgency from inside a mine. Skyrim's lore doesn't end here. It keeps going into the books you haven't read yet, the stones you haven't translated, the ruins you walked past on your way somewhere else. The world is bigger than any single playthrough, bigger than any single video, bigger than we can fully hold at once. But on quiet nights, in the hours when sleep comes slowly, you can sit at the edge of it and listen to it hum, something like an ancient machine. Something like a word in a language that changes reality when you finally understand it. Thank you for spending this time in it with me. If these facts hit different for you, if some of them made you see the game differently, or made you want to load it up at some strange hour and look at things more carefully, then this did exactly what it was meant to do. Like this video if it helped you find the edge of sleep. Subscribe if you want to go deeper into worlds like this one. And leave a comment down below telling me where you were listening from tonight and which fact hit hardest. I read every single one. Rest well, cozy nights. The graybeards are still at the top of the mountain, staying very, very quiet. The automatons are still patrolling ruins no one remembers. Parthenax is still up there fighting himself in the dark and the snow, thousands of years in, still choosing to be good. Sleep well.